Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is The Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, AFGE responds to bad faith attacks on federal workers. We've got a report from the Madison City Council. We've got updates on pre-K Alabama, all that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show, we've got a phone number and the line is open. That phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also text the program and leave us a voicemail or send us a text message throughout the week. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, because sometimes we do a little extra stuff throughout the week. Sometimes we'll make some good posts. You'll get to see maybe some pictures of us out and about. If you want to do that, then you can find us online. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. You can also listen to potentially some extra stuff on our TikTok channel, on wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, all that good stuff. Just search The Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to support the program, make a one-time donation, buy a hat, or buy our one remaining Join a Union shirt, then you can go to our website, tvlr.fm, and you can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, then definitely think about getting your local to sponsor the show. One of our sponsors is going to have to drop in the new year. They're reallocating some funding, so definitely would be helpful to be able to make that up sooner rather than later. So definitely hit us up. Hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, wherever most of y'all who are active in your unions around here probably have my contact information. So feel free to hit me up if you want any direction. I'm more than happy on any direction on getting your local to sponsor the show, getting your union to sponsor the show. I am more than happy to come and talk at your local meetings. Talk about the program, what we do, some of our history, and how we structure the show, how we structure advertisements, and what kind of deals we could work out. So
absolutely, and it's not just unions too. If you belong to an advocacy group, or you have a media operation yourself, or you are a labor-friendly law firm, any of those type of organizations, definitely hit us up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Adam, you wanted to...
since I mentioned law firms, let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. My old Uniserv director hat came on as I was reviewing this week's outline, and I just thought we might want to put that disclaimer in there from now on. And I do want to announce that we have a survey Jacob and I have been working on, so we hope to get that sent out in the next couple of days. If you're not already on our email list, definitely go to tvlr.fm and get signed up so you can see that survey as soon as it comes out.
Absolutely. Yeah. So any feedback that you have for us, more than welcome in that survey. And wanted to start off the show with, we don't have just a lot of prepared thoughts on the latest, police murder of civilians. Tyree Nichols in Memphis. He was a FedEx driver, brutally murdered by the cops. And, like I said, I don't have a lot to say about it other than what, we've said before, which is that, police brutality, this kind of stuff is a workers' issue. This kind of stuff doesn't happen to wealthy people, doesn't happen to bosses. This kind of stuff happens to working people, to poor people, to homeless folks, and people on the margins of our society. And so it's in my view incumbent on the workers' movement to be firmly against this and to be for the protection of civilians, the protection of working people against the cops. I do not understand how people can see issue after issue, incident after incident like this, and not come to the conclusion that the institution of policing is deeply, deeply flawed in this country, and that there are that we need to scale it back. I mean, the latest big upsurge in protests against police brutality took place in 2020. And so what was the answer to that? The answer to that was, where there was an answer at all, was increased funding for police. There was occasionally a few more diversity programs. This obviously didn't work because the 5 cops that killed Tyree were black. There were some trainings, and my understanding is that these cops were on a post-2020, quote unquote neighborhood community policing kind of thing, and so that it's obviously not helped in this or in so many other occasions. And people will point, and in this case, actually, this is probably one of the only ones that I've seen, because even in the Ben Darby case here in Huntsville, the police unions have been in support of murderers. But this time they have, the Grand Lodge of the Fraternal Order of Police has seen fit to, cut these people loose. They put out a statement yesterday condemning this, but this is basically the only one. The Fraternal Order of Police is still defending convicted murderer Ben Darby here in Huntsville. And in every instance, almost universally, that's what they do. That's what the leadership of the police departments do. It's what their management does, and it's what their unions do. And so, I mean, we have to take power away from them. It seems to me that's the only way to address the issue. A statement from AFL-CIO President Liz Shuler and AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Fred Redmond, they issued this yesterday. Our hearts break for Tyree Nichols, those who loved him, and a community in pain. In light of his death during a violent encounter at the hands of 5 Memphis police officers during a traffic stop on January 7th. Tyree was a beloved father, son, and friend who was working to build a good life for himself and his family. We joined the call in demanding justice for Tyree and remain dedicated to advancing racial justice throughout our nation.
Yeah, I just want to echo those sentiments. It's disturbing to see police violence time after time after time. In this case, they have all been charged with murder, but as you pointed out, that's typically not the response. And the sad thing is, we've had this police violence on top of mass shootings, and we've had, just so many mass shootings already. We're barely 1 month into the new year, and it's just, I think, symptoms of a profoundly sick society. And that's something that, I hear a lot of folks agree with, frankly, across the political spectrum. Liberals, conservatives, radicals. I think most of us recognize there's something deeply deeply wrong in this country. In a country where police can routinely beat and murder civilians, and where civilians don't feel safe at work or at recreation or even at home from the threats of violence and mass shootings. And on that note, I wanted to lift up a statement from the United Farm Workers, who experienced the loss of several of their members in one of the multiple mass shootings that just took place in California. And quoting from the UFW, in response to the reported killings of 7 farm workers and the wounding of several more in the Half Moon Bay, California area, the UFW issued the following statement. The mass shooting spree that has left 7 farm workers dead in California leaves us heartbroken, angry, and demanding answers. As we wait for more news, the entire UFW mourns the loss of 7 farm workers. While we did not know them, they were part of the too often invisible, yet always essential agricultural workforce that feeds America and the world. As farm workers and as human beings, they deserved far better. We dream of a nation in which all farm workers, regardless of their ethnicity or national origin, are treated with dignity, in which our streets no longer bear bloodshed after bloodshed, and in which our hearts have a moment to heal in between breaking.
Yeah, that's a good statement. With that, we'll go ahead and get to our the first segment, or the segment that we normally start off the show with. That's Last Week in Southern Labor. That's a segment that we do every week, mostly, where we tell you what happened in the labor movement in the South. We pull the information from Jonah Furman's newsletter, Who Gets the Bird, which compiles all this information for the entire United States. So if you want to see what's going on outside of the South, then subscribe to that newsletter. You can do that at whogetsthebird.substack.com. Before we jump into that, I wanted to mention that for Jacqueline, Jonah actually wrote about the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics report on union membership in the United States in the last year. The big picture, the 20-year view of where we're at. So definitely check that out. Jonah's review in Jacobin, as well as friend of the show Connor Lewis's review in These Times, are both, I think, very crucial in understanding where we're at and where to go from here. With that, let's jump into new organizing for the week of January 15th to January 22nd. Pretty slow, but we did have 73 workers at Creature Comforts Brewery in Athens, Georgia, launching the Independent Brewery Union of Georgia. Very cool. We had several wins and losses, though. In a mixed result, SEIU Texas won one and lost one election among 2 units of workers at Tenet's Hospitals of Providence. The Sierra campus in El Paso, Texas, 242 service maintenance and techs voted 67-7 to join the union, while 63 professional employees voted 3-8 not to. 77 workers who make polymerization chemicals for Neuron in La Porte, Texas, voted 40-36 to unionize with the United Steelworkers. 19 dancers at the Memphis Ballet have voted to join AGMA, though the NLRB site hasn't updated with a count. 14 bus drivers for DS Bus Lines in Amarillo, Texas, voted 8-4 to join Teamsters Local 577. 13 subcontracted Border Patrol mechanics in Harlingen, Texas, voted 8-0 to join Machinists Local 2949. 9 subcontracted workers at a DC wastewater treatment plant voted 3-6 against joining Operating Engineers Local 99. 34 Starbucks workers at 2 locations, including in Flower Mound, Texas, voted 24-8 to join Starbucks Workers United, while in a rerun of a loss, 25 more Starbucks workers in Lafayette, Louisiana, voted again not to, 10-10. Teachers in Prince William County, Virginia, are voting on formal unionization, having won a local collective bargaining ordinance. In strike and bargaining updates, the UMWA strike at Warrior Met in Brookwood, Alabama, far and away remains the longest-running active strike in the country, which has now entered its 3rd calendar year and is coming up on 2 full years. Around 100 maintenance workers with the Machinists Local 56 are on strike at Muller company in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which produces water valves. Sounds like this is primarily a fight over working hours, specifically about the company attempting to limit overtime. It's also the union's first strike at the plant since 1976. Jeff Shirk at In These Times looked at how rail workers are keeping up the fight for sick leave after being shut down by the U.S. Congress and President Joe Biden. On a couple of smaller carriers, rail workers with the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen and the IBEW ratified new contracts. In politics and legislation, a federal court upheld a 2019 ruling that blocked some Trump-era NLRB efforts to make union elections take longer, which benefits the employer. There were some administrative items that survived, but on the whole, it seems like minor good news for workers trying to organize through the NLRB. With that, we're going to go ahead and head to a break. On the other side, we are talking to Jacqueline Simon, Policy Director of the American Federation of Government Employees, about the Show Up Act, targeting federal workers' ability to telework. We'll be right back.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial, working-class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBEW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know about how viable clean and renewable energy is. To that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to more than thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state. We're working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about our work and how you can join us at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at IBEW136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morris, and my co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call or send us a text. That phone number is 844-899-TVLR. I do see that we've got a caller on the line, and we will get to you just as soon as we finish with our first guest, who is Jacqueline Simon. She is the policy director for the American Federation of Government Employees, representing 700,000 federal workers, and she is our first guest this morning. Jacqueline, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure.
So, we wanted to talk to somebody from AFGE about the Show Up Act. This, now, you know, it hasn't gotten just a whole lot of media attention, I think partly because it's obvious that this isn't going to pass. You know, there's no way that this is going to make it through the Senate because it's a really, it's a really anti-worker piece of legislation. It's also just anti-efficiency. It very obviously would not be good for the administration of the federal service, if you know anything about the way that it works. But you know, before we get, you know, too much into the analysis of what it would do, what is the Show Up Act?
Well, I'll tell you specifically what the Show Up Act is and sort of try to provide a context for it. I would just also like to say one thing we've learned through bitter experience at AFGE is never to assume that something extreme like this has no chance of passing. You never know. Politicians have a way of stabbing federal employees in the back when it's expedient, and you never know when this might get added to something because people don't really care about the consequences to federal workers. So we take it very seriously. That's my way of saying that we take the legislation very seriously because we have to. You never underestimate the people who try to make life miserable for federal employees.
That's a good point.
And it's in that context we should talk about this bill. You know, this is an early piece of legislation from a committee that's clearly intent on trying to disrupt the operation of the federal government, undermine certainly federal employee unions and union rights, and do everything they can to attack federal employees as, you know, lazy, overpaid, worthless bureaucrats. Mm-hmm. So it's in that context that this is, you know, sort of an early volley from this committee. There are going to be a lot of terrible bills from them. And this one basically requires federal agencies to go back to pre-pandemic policies on remote work and telework. Pretend that the pandemic never happened. Pretend that, you know, no lessons were learned whatsoever from the pandemic in terms of the benefits of telework to a certain segment of the federal workforce. Of course, it certainly bypasses the collective bargaining process because in the intervening years, several agencies have negotiated new collective bargaining agreements. Certainly post-Trump, we've negotiated collective bargaining agreements that expand telework. It's an acknowledgement by agency management, who are by no means pro-union in any sense of that term, but they've recognized that from the perspective of their own, responsibilities for carrying out the mission of their agency, that telework has been a boon. It helps with recruitment and retention. People are more productive measurably. They're more engaged, and the agency saves some money. So there are many, many positive aspects of the increase in telework. And then this shouldn't need saying, but it also pretends that the pandemic is over. And the pandemic is definitely not over. There are a lot of people who are either immunocompromised themselves or live with people who have disabilities that make the prospect of a COVID infection possibly deadly. And there's, health and safety issues at the workplace are extremely important. And, going back to pre-pandemic everything, which is what this Show Up Act envisions, just absolutely ignores any kind of, health and safety concerns that the federal workforce have of going back to, crowded buildings that are full of, open cubicles where, everybody's coughing on everybody else, and there's no infrastructure in place to truly help people protect themselves from COVID infection and other infections.
Right. And the Show Up Act, it is an acronym for Stopping Home Office Work's Unproductive Problems Act of 2022. The sponsor is Representative Yvette Harrell, a Republican from New Mexico. And it's worth noting that in their announcement on the background of this, in all of their statements on this that I've seen, they're vaguely pointing to this or that problem, but they have no actual evidence. They have no, they talk about a lack of productivity. Well, if there's a lack of productivity, show it to us. Give us the numbers. How are you measuring this? What is the actual detriment that you are seeing, that you're claiming to see, right? And they don't have it. They don't have anything.
Well, of course not. But again, the productivity and effectiveness of government agencies is the last priority for this group of people. Remember, these are the same people who are so cavalier about the prospect of defaulting on the national debt. These are people who are, have on numerous occasions over the last several years, shut down the government without any concern whatsoever about its impact, not only on federal employees, of course, but on the public at large that depend on the services of federal agencies. They don't care about productivity. They care about disruption, chaos, and imposing harm on workers.
And it also pretends that there are no mechanisms for management to work towards a resolution where there are issues. Because in our CBA, there are mechanisms for, like, if for some reason there is theoretically an individual worker who is having issues being productive at home, there are mechanisms for management to roll that back. And that's going to be the same way in any CBA, in any agreement where we're expanding telework. There are going to be disciplinary actions that management can take. And so if they want, if these problems exist, it would only be because management is allowing, this issue to happen. It wouldn't be because of the workers.
Well, that's absolutely true. One of their other favorite themes is, the poor performer and how impossible and difficult it is to get rid of a poor performer in a federal agency. And of course, that's always a management failure. There are there's plenty of authority and tools and opportunity for federal managers and supervisors to hold employees accountable for doing their work. Unfortunately, these poor performers are just evidence of the lack of accountability for management. But another issue that we're having to deal with constantly, certainly here in Washington, D.C., is sort of a steady drumbeat by the Washington Post and other mainstream newspapers complaining that the federal workforce isn't doing its job of providing customers to downtown businesses. Now, of course, the Washington metropolitan area does have a large concentration of federal employees, but only 15% of the overall federal workforce works in the Washington area. And also, just in terms of facts and figures, over half of the federal workforce never worked anywhere except their regular duty station, even in the most dangerous moments of the pandemic. We're talking law enforcement, border patrol agents, corrections officers in federal prisons, civilian DoD workers who had to still show up at military depots, people who work in veteran VA hospitals, cemeteries, clinics. That group makes up more than half of the overall federal workforce, and all of them showed tremendous bravery and dedication and perseverance throughout the pandemic. They were often, left without personal protective gear. It was very scarce, if you recall, during the early stages of the pandemic. Back when there was no vaccine, there was no good treatment. Hospitals were overflowing. Who knew if you could get a bed in a hospital if you did get infected, and they still showed up at their regular duty station and put themselves at risk every day. I forgot to mention transportation security officers at airports. A very large portion of the federal workforce.
Commissary workers. Yeah, there's all sorts of folks.
They don't have the kind of job. Exactly. They're, like grocery store workers. The workers who were able to perform their duties remotely. I mean, I want to say they were no less heroic. They had kids at home, trying to get either young kids who were out of daycare or school age kids who, they're trying to make sure that they actually looked at their screen all day or, continued to get to school or activities or just dealt with their boredom or, stir craziness. Other family members who were, confined to the house because of, fears of the consequences of infection, if they were in a category that for whom, a COVID infection was a death sentence. And they managed to log on every day and still perform their duties, still get the work done, still provide services to the American public. They were just as heroic. And this bill is a slap in the face to all of us. And that, regardless of the category of worker, I think that federal employees ought to be celebrated for the absolutely tremendous work they've done throughout the pandemic. And I don't personally consider the pandemic to be over.
And the and one more thing about, and this ties into the efficient administration of the federal service, which we understand that these people are not concerned with, but just one more thing to point out is that if the federal government unilaterally as an employer rolled back telework, that is going to severely hamper our ability to compete and attract talent, because so many jobs that can be done from home, their employers, including the federal government, are giving them the flexibility to do that if workers want to. And so if I, as a worker, have an offer from a federal for a federal job where I'm going to make less money, I'm going to have all these other things, and severely a lot less money. I think on average it's like 20% less than I would in the private sector. And now you're going to tell me that in addition to that, I'm not going to be able to telework like I could in the private sector. And so it's just that would be one more way. My agency is already having trouble attracting talent just because we don't offer very often remote work. We offer telework 3 days a week, but a lot of places, a lot of people that we're trying to hire are going to places where they can work remotely year-round from a different state, right? And so just that is making it difficult for us to compete. I couldn't imagine what would happen if talk about bureaucrats who aren't actually doing, these people far removed from my workplace in D.C. tell us that our agency does no longer has the ability to authorize telework.
Well, I think that last point you make is really can't be made enough. And that is, on the one hand, some of these ideologues are all about management flexibility and all power to management, and management knows best. But the reality is that management has negotiated telework policies. Managers like telework too for themselves, not just for the people they supervise. And they have negotiated these agreements. They have used them successfully for many years prior to the pandemic. And now politicians in Washington are unilateral telling them, we don't really care what you want. We don't care what you judge to be in the best interests of your agency or your program. We know better. We're sitting here in Washington, D.C., and we can tell you what to do. And what we're telling you to do is unilaterally turn back the clock and pretend that the pandemic didn't happen and is therefore over, I guess. Right. But yes, that's a really good point. I'm also glad you raised the whole issue of the pay gap between federal employees and people who do similar jobs in the private sector and state and local government. The most recent data from the Federal Salary Council, which is based on Bureau of Labor Statistics data, has an average overall gap across the country, a little over 23%. We just had legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate this week to provide an 8.7% pay increase for federal employees for 2024, which of course is not enough, but it's still a lot more than what federal employees have gotten in the last several years, really decades. And, we've got a generational turnover in the federal workforce happening as we speak. And it's happening, of course, at all businesses and governments. And, as the baby boomers retire, there is competition for a lot of different kind of skills. And in that, we got to include people in the skilled trades. My union represents hourly workers who are in very high demand, and the federal government has a terrible time trying to recruit and retain people with the kind of skills to work on, nuclear submarines and electronic weapon systems and keep the building operating in a VA hospital or a prison. And, they got a pay gap there. We got a pay gap for white collar workers who are paid salaries. In some locations, that pay gap is 50%. Right. And so, one of the things that's happening in order to sort of avoid dealing with the pay gap, and now maybe, God forbid, this huge gap in terms of working conditions about whether or not people can telework or work remotely, what they want to do is kind of get away from the competitive system of the civil service and allow agencies to just hire on the spot and hire whoever they want to without requiring the job applicants to either compete against one another to make sure we get the best person, or give veterans a leg up, or any kind of transparent competitive system. They want accepted service and non-competitive hiring. And if the Trump era taught us anything, it's how susceptible our civil service is to corruption. This is just one more nail in the coffin, really, because as you point out, it will make recruitment and retention a lot more difficult.
Yeah. Jacqueline Simon, Policy Director for the American Federation of Government Employees. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye. Adam, we've still got that caller on the line, right?
Yes, we should. I believe it is Jack from New Jersey. Want me to go ahead and put him on the line?
Yeah, let's bring him on the line. Jack from New Jersey?
Hey, Jake and Adam. How you doing?
Hey, man. Doing good. How are you? What you got on your mind?
I wanted to call in with a couple comments from last week. And sorry if I'm out of breath. I'm walking to North Jersey DSA's chapter convention right now.
Okay, very cool. Very cool.
But first, that last week in Southern Labor up front. I definitely appreciate that. Good to get a weekly reminder that that Southern tradition of worker organizing is still alive and well. And my other comment was the segment last week, the interview with Larissa Petrucci about prevailing wage. Thank you for that. I worked in the office for a small non-union subcontractor, and those prevailing wage jobs, those were what got the installers like enough to live on. And yeah, it's bad enough the way some of the construction workers get treated. Don't come to their money too.
Right. Yeah, I think that, the destruction of prevailing wage is a really important issue for folks to understand, and folks to understand the benefits of it where they still have it, for sure.
As far as I know, it's not under attack here in New Jersey, and I'm thankful for that. But
well, yeah, you gotta make sure that y'all keep it that way up there.
Absolutely.
Oh, I know.
All right. Well,
All right,
thanks
well,
for. Do what?
Oh, I was gonna say now I gotta go back to YouTube and listen to that segment on Show Up, because the phone line only played your side.
All right.
But that's fine.
Well, thanks for calling in, Jack.
All
We
right,
really
have a great
appreciate
day,
it,
guys.
and good luck at the convention. I hope y'all have
Yeah.
a good, successful meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Appreciate it.
I wanted to mention really quickly the Case New Holland strike, because we've talked about it before with Mel Buer, who's been doing a lot of reporting for it, who's been doing a lot of reporting on it for the Real News Network.
Yes.
It lasted about 8 months, and now the 1,100-member Case New Holland strike is over, with members of the two striking locals, the UAW Local 180 in Racine, Wisconsin, and Local 807 in Burlington, Iowa, voting by 62% to accept the deal. Haven't seen the details yet, pulling some of this from Jonah's newsletter. I did a little bit of reading this morning and wasn't able to find any real, detailed analysis of it, but workers rejected a deal by 55 to 45% 2 weeks ago that reportedly provided for 28% wages but kept some health care concessions. So presumably there are at least some tweaks to this offer that swung those 17 percentage points. And part of that tweak, unfortunately, may have been the company's threat to hire 220 permanent replacement workers, which they announced soon before the vote.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. We've talked a little bit about the PRO Act here on the show. My understanding is that under the PRO Act, were that to become law, a company could not do what they threatened to do by bringing in permanent replacement workers for the striking workers. Was that your read on it as well? It's been a while.
Yes,
it has been a while.
It's been a long time. I just Googled it while you were mentioning that. But yes, the PRO Act does prohibit employers from permanently replacing striking workers. It bans the use of offensive lockouts and removes prohibitions on secondary activity. Is some of those things? Is some of the things that the PRO Act does as it relates to strikes. But yeah, that's and the whole ability. It really should. Frankly, we shouldn't need another law to ban permanent replacements, because the only reason that employers are able to quote unquote permanently replace striking workers is because of an absurd interpretation of the NLRA prohibition on firing workers for striking. The law already prohibits you as an employer. It is illegal for you to fire an employee for striking. That is illegal. And it has been illegal for nearly 100 years. But because of some radical, activist judge, activist pro-boss judge, they interpreted this law in some bizarre way to allow bosses to permanently replace an employee, which is somehow different
than being
mechanically than being fired.
Right.
It's so absurd. It's absurd. And if we had a judiciary that was actually committed to just, an originalist understanding of the NLRA or labor law in this country, they would not be able to already. It would be illegal to permanently replace employees, because what does it mean when you permanently replace an employee? That means they're fired. That means they do not have a job to go back to. And so how is that different? How is that different from if somebody, we have a prohibition on firing striking workers. And so somehow it's illegal for you to go up and say you're fired, but it's not illegal for you to go up and say you don't have a job anymore. It's just absurd. It's the stupidest, most, it's just ridiculous.
It is, yeah. And I think, there again, we see where labor law, as inefficient and insufficient as it is in this country, even what's on the books is not properly interpreted or properly enforced, right? Because I think the other piece to that is when a company gets to the point that they're bringing in permanent replacement workers, you got a pretty clear sign that they've been bargaining in bad faith.
Yeah,
in my opinion. And I think that's also another trend where these companies, they act in bad faith. They have no real desire to negotiate in good faith, but they're confident that the government will allow them to get away with it. Think about Warrior Met Coal. I mean, does anyone really think here, 20 months deep, over 20 months deep into the strike, that Warrior Met Coal was acting in good faith, that they really want to settle this strike? It's absurd. So I haven't followed the Case New Holland strike very closely, with it being in Iowa and, that kind of outside of our neck of the woods. But I'm certainly happy to see this strike come to an end. I hope that it was a successful contract win for these 1,100 members. Just want to send my love and solidarity to the UAW members out there for fighting the good fight.
Absolutely. You got an update for us on domestic workers, right, Adam?
Yeah, I'd like to just chip in with updates here and there from different industries as we get them. I did get some updates from the Domestic Workers Alliance. And, of course, we know that domestic workers have long played an important role in our society and have long been among the most exploited workers in the country. Domestic workers are disproportionately women of color, often immigrants. A recent survey of Spanish-speaking domestic workers shed some light on their current conditions. 70% of those surveyed said they wanted to work more hours. 40% of respondents faced housing insecurity, and nearly 80% experienced food insecurity in the fourth quarter of 2022. So things are really tough for domestic workers in this country. But we do have some good news out of the National Domestic Workers Alliance to pass along. And it's always nice, as a labor show, to get a little bit of good news, considering the daunting odds we face day in and day out in this challenge. So, quote, on December 20th, Washington, D.C. officially became the 13th city or state in the country to pass a Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. This is huge for the domestic worker movement in D.C. and across the country. Over 4 years ago, in 2018, domestic workers in the newly formed D.C. chapter of NDWA began organizing to end the exclusion of domestic workers from D.C.'s Human Rights Act, the only group of workers to be excluded from this right in D.C. The D.C. Domestic Workers Bill of Rights passed the D.C. Council unanimously. The bill finally includes domestic workers in D.C.'s human rights protections, which guaranteed protections against discrimination at work. It also includes domestic workers in D.C.'s occupational health and safety law. It will create the new right for domestic workers who work in D.C. to have a written contract with their employers, and it will create a domestic worker outreach and education program to give community-based organizations money to help domestic workers know their rights and enforce their rights. This bill is an unprecedented recognition in D.C. of the value and dignity of work that domestic workers do. So, wanted to pass along that statement from the NWDA. Love to see some good news. Glad to see this. I hope there are many more victories like this in the future. I know that NWDA is fighting for a national domestic worker bill of rights at the federal level. They won a historic congressional hearing this past year. They're pushing hard to pass it at the federal level, but as we've already discussed today in reference to federal employees, Congress is not very worker-friendly these days, if they ever were. So wins like this at the local and state level are really important. They're small but positive steps in the right direction. So love and solidarity to our brothers and sisters working in the domestic work industry and to the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Good work.
Absolutely. That's great news. Love to get great news. And even if the horizon is hopefully going to be better than the good news, but better to see things improve than to stay the same or get worse. That's for sure. With that, we're going to go ahead and go to a break really quick. On the other side, we're going to be doing a new regular segment where we're going to be getting city council updates from some local city council watchers. Really excited about starting this. I think it'll be helpful. And despite some, maybe your initial inclination is city council watcher, updates from the city council. That's so boring. I think maybe there are reasons to that will not be the case.
Having attended hundreds of government meetings, there are a lot of things, but often not very boring.
Yes.
Sometimes it's better than entertainment than what's on TV.
Right. Yep. So with that, we'll be right back. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. We have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about our work advocating for customers and join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial, working-class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at AFGE.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We are going to be starting up a new regular segment, and this part of the show is probably going to be expanding, but we're going to be starting off today with Tristan Gilbert, and we're going to be reviewing what's been going on at the Madison City Council meetings. We're working on getting somebody lined up to give us regular updates about the Huntsville City Council. And if anybody out there is interested and currently watches or is maybe interested in beginning to watch the Decatur and Athens City Council meetings, we'd love to be able to get regular updates from those 4 cities on the show. So, you know, if you're already doing that, particularly if you're already doing that, then definitely hit up the show. Or if you want to do that and work with us on getting those updates out there, then feel free to reach out.
Right. I mean, even if you don't feel comfortable appearing on live radio or on video, understand that. But if you are already attending your local city council meetings or other government agencies, for that matter, school board or county commission, if you're already there and you're taking notes and kind of passing those notes along to whoever it may be, your friends, your neighbors, your county party, whatever it may be, hit us up. See if there's a way we can collaborate and we can put your information out there, and of course give you credit for that and help pass that information along to inform the community.
Yep. So like I said, Tristan Gilbert, he's our next guest. He is a city council watcher. He's been watching the Madison City Council for a while now. And so, since he's doing that already, figured why don't we bring him on the show to talk about it. So Tristan, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Jacob. I appreciate you having me on to talk about what's been going down in Madison. Hopefully it'll be entertaining for your listeners. It's not been bad for me. Would you like me to start with my overall themes?
Yeah, go ahead. And so, we figured because this is the first time that we're going to be doing this, it'll maybe be a little bit more succinct in future months, but we figured it might be worth having just an overview of what's been going on the last 3 months, and we can dig into a couple of the issues. But yeah, so what have been the big themes at the Madison City Council meetings over the last few months?
So the 3 big things that have been going on since November are currently, for number 1, Madison is considering transitioning to a city manager form of government. It's currently a council to mayor form of government, where the council is the sort of legislative branch and the mayor handles the executive work, the day-to-day operations. If they switch to a city manager branch, the mayor will become instead a member of the council, sort of the seventh at-large member voted on by the whole city, so not per district. And instead of him doing day-to-day things, the entire council would then elect a city manager or hire a city manager. Theoretically, this is somebody who would have credentials in local government and somebody who would stay on as a steady, sort of a steady bureaucratic hand throughout multiple administrations. And those two forms of government, both mayor to council and council to manager, are pretty common throughout the country. There's a couple of others, but those are the two big ones. And I personally don't see a huge number of changes coming if they implement that. I'm not really. I usually try to gauge a government's form's value by like how democratic it is, and I kind of see pros and cons to both. But there are some people who are regular commenters at the meetings who are a little more impassioned about their opinions, particularly for or against that change. So interested to see where it goes. I know the main spearheading group behind pushing for a city manager form of government is a group called Madison Forward. They have a .org you can look them up at if anybody's interested to know more about that. And later on, or whenever you want to run it, I did have a clip from somebody who appeared to speak about that. But do you have any questions on that theme before we move on to the next thing?
Yeah. Well, let's actually, Adam, I want to go ahead and play that clip, actually, because it does seem, it seems kind of, this particular thing, like you mentioned, I don't really have a strong opinion about it. I would be interested after we play this clip. I'd be interested in Madison Forward's argument for it, and maybe some of the less bombastic arguments against it. But Adam, let's play this from Margie.
Okay, I think I know exactly which one you've labeled it.
Yes.
Margie Daly, Karen's district. City manager, monarchy, dictatorship. We might as well go back to British rule. A group think type government. A green giant of power grabs. Plausible deniability silences the voices of we the people. Zero public input. Even less transparency. Madison Forward petition signatures were collected under less than honest, truthful means. Deceptive, nefarious at best. We will not be anything like Auburn, Festivia Hills, or Mountain Brook. They've had that for decades, the 1960s and the 1980s. The new law updates bring us a socialist groupthink structure. We won't give up our constitutional rights and choose to implement the corporate board with as few as 5 people to run our city. I believe many voters moved here to get away from crime, regulations, multiple level dwellings, needle exchanges, high taxes, lobbyists, big government, etc. Taking our constitutional rights, eliminating separation of powers, eliminating the executive branch of government, eliminating our votes on the person who runs our city in perpetuity. You took our lighting on the main roads in the older neighborhoods. Ordinance to no longer prosecute small crimes, opioid settlement for a needle exchange. Our city has enough intellectually competent citizens. They can look up what a city manager is online. This government type is failing all over our nation. Corruption in most cases. It's used globally, sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation. City manager is globalist. Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, China, etc. Madison needs updated infrastructure and road repairs. giving us only piecemeal while developers, Ball Corps, MVP receive all our tax dollars. We need road improvements, traffic lights, water and sewerage is insufficient. There's about 15 supposed grassroots nonprofit, yet they consist of the same 10 people. You have no clue how to treat your constituents and build a secure, safe city. We must not allow you to steal our government structure by deception. Install a selected individual. Deny our right to choose an elected by the people mayor. Vote no city manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Staley.
All right, so that was
that was a lot.
That was a lot there, but I think the first thing that just has to be mentioned is that she's a Yankee. I mean, right? Like that's the first thing.
I did wonder where that accent came from. I couldn't quite place it, but
and ain't from around here, that's for sure.
I will have to commend her though on sticking to her 3-minute window to speak. There's a lot of people that go over that as a habit. She's very practiced. I believe she's there every week. What a character.
Yeah. So does the city manager proposal include directives for the city manager to institute needle exchanges, more multi-level housing, and socialism? And I mean, is that in the proposal?
Not as far as I'm aware. Maybe my research is lacking there. I do have Madison Forward's website pulled up. I'm still learning some of this myself, but I can read some of their bullet points.
Do you happen before you get to that? Do you happen to see China, Cuba, Venezuela? Are there fingerprints on this?
Oh, there it is in the fine print. It's way at the bottom of no, nothing.
See, that's how they get you.
I thought there was a little hammer and sickle down there at the bottom of the website. That's those damn globalists.
Right. I thought this was a very local issue. So looking at Madison Forward's website, they have some drop downs. Probably the most relevant one for us is who benefits from a council manager form of government. In their words, they say Madison residents because they gain continuity and accountability in city government as well as increased transparency. Not sure I agree with that one, but moving on, their Madison City school system benefits because it can engage in a more long-term strategic planning with the city and reap the benefits of a stronger economy. Madison City Hall because a trained, certified professional runs the day-to-day operations of the city, freeing up the mayor to advocate more for Madison and Montgomery and beyond. And city employees because they're hired based on their education and experience, not on political patronage. I think that the points 2 through 4 have some weight behind them. The entire idea is that it creates some continuity in who is running the day-to-day operations of the city. I actually, on the first one where they gain a layer of accountability and transparency, I'm not really sure. Margie might have a point on that one.
I would push back on that as well.
Yeah, that seems dubious.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about an unelected executive running the day-to-day operations of the city, I find that hard to believe that somehow there's more accountability involved. To your point, I see what they're saying with the other bits of rationale. I'm not so sure I agree or disagree one way or the other, but I see what they're saying. But the first,
and there's definitely an argument that Margie has. The Cuba bit aside, there's
right. Yeah, I mean, okay. Obviously, Miss Margie is a confused woman. If she believes that the Rockefellers, Venezuela, China,
are
and
interested
Cuba,
in Madison City municipal government,
right, and that somehow they're all on the same side, and also that socialism promotes corporate board management. Anyway,
but yeah, so that's interesting though about the civil service in Madison. Is there not already some sort of is that how municipal employees in Madison are picked? Is every time there's a new mayor elected, they throw out the old everybody and there's no regular civil service?
I doubt that they throw out everybody and do mass layoffs or firings, but what I do think is that one benefit of the manager is that they would be elected by the entire board, which would include the mayor. So the mayor is somebody that every resident gets a vote on, and then they each have their district representatives as well. So it's not a complete lack of transparency, and I can see the benefits from it. They were talking in some of the meetings about how currently the people that handle the day-to-day operations are just chosen like at the pleasure of the mayor, whoever that is. But it was the mayor himself making that claim. So maybe there's a beef with a previous mayor that I am not aware of. I've only been living in Madison for a couple of years now. And I'm technically not in one of these districts. So I'm right outside it in this strange Huntsville district that wraps around the entirety of Madison. The map is entertaining. But maybe it lends me some objectivity. I can listen in without rippling the water too much.
Right.
You could say.
Yeah. Before we go on to the next point, we had a Free American 2020 in the chat said that she left out that having a city manager will promote abortion and kick kittens. So these are important things to note. So the next issue from the Madison City Council meeting is this community center. Talk to us. What's going on there?
Yeah. So in my research, it looks like they've had this senior center up on Hughes for several years, which is falling into disrepair and otherwise performs a pretty vital service for the community. So for the last 2 years, they've been planning to replace it with a community center. This will be built on the bones of another existing building to save costs, but the costs are still fairly high. It's an $11 million proposal, and it looks really good from the plans. They have a slideshow and everything with computer-generated graphics. It's going to contain all sorts of meeting rooms that are open to the public for different groups to use. It's going to contain things like space for community gardens and gardening workshops. They even included workshops for pottery and woodworking in there, which smells like a pet project to me. But I mean, I might try it if it's there, if it's open to the public. Right. And it's built on a 30-acre plot, so it's going to be pretty large and significant. I am cautiously optimistic about this. I think Madison, as a car-dependent suburb, is pretty lacking in third places that you can go without having to spend money. I've certainly been feeling the burn on that myself. So having anywhere to go that is not just an underfunded park and maybe has indoor places to collaborate with others would be a boon to this city, I think. But it was met with some consternation by council members who felt left out of the planning process. And I sent you another rather long clip. They balked at the price tag, and nobody was really sure about what had been available to them before, or whether it was getting dumped on them to vote in that session. So things got a little heated, and I was lucky to be online to catch all of that.
Yeah, and let's play that. It is longer. It's like 6 minutes, so we'll only play the first bit of it because right at the beginning you can tell like there's a pretty underhanded, underhanded compliment in it just right at the top, and so we'll play that and we'll come back. It's the clip where the councilor and the mayor are talking.
This is no secret to anybody. I'll say, based on listening to what you're saying, and I'll start with this. It'll be great to have you re-engaged.
Yeah, and so there you go. There's
from there.
That was that was it. That was what I wanted to play. That was the mayor, right, Tristan, telling a council member like, "Oh yeah, it'd be great to have you re-engaged." Like, like really super nice smile on his face, all this, and like what he's telling him is like, "I don't know where you've been."
Yeah, that was Mayor Paul Finley talking to Councilman. I think I said his name, Tommy something. Powell, I think. Councilman Powell. Sorry, didn't have that ready to go. Still learning all their names. Yeah, Teddy Powell, that's it. Powell's argument was that he had tried to be engaged, but every time he went over to the mayor's office, the mayor's people were kicking them out, saying they were in the way and asking useless questions or that sort of thing. He said that but the mayor said they had been open with this information for years, and repeated that it'd be nice to have you engage line again. And at some point, Teddy Powell was like, "You're going to let me finish. I let you finish through that. You're not going to attack me. I'm going to finish." So, yeah, very, very hot session here in Madison.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying before our commercial break, that it is not unusual if you actually watch some of these city council meetings and school board meetings to observe all sorts of petty antics, feuding, some interesting exchanges you'll get from these elected officials.
For sure.
So
anything else on the center?
Well, in your notes, you just mentioned that there were a lot of comments from the public that were not in favor of the community center. Did it seem like that was the consensus in the room? Which is obviously the consensus in the room. It probably people understand, but it needs to be said that the consensus of the room is not necessarily the consensus of the population, right? It's a very select group, but the people in the room seem to be opposed to it.
If I remember right, there was a split, but I think it tends to be the people who are panicking about an imminent change that come to city council meetings to have their voice heard because they otherwise feel left out, which is completely understandable. So I do remember, I think Miss Margie was there again, or it may have been somebody else, complaining about the city's priorities, essentially wanting them to refurbish the existing senior center or focus on sidewalks or lighting somewhere. And I don't fully understand the state of all of those things. Again, I just live on the edge of Madison and drive through select parts of it on the daily. But even the council members themselves were concerned about dropping $11 million on a community center, writing the check today for a multi-year project, and wondering what they might be ignoring as an opportunity cost. Most of their finances seem to come from like bond issuances and stuff is what they talk. That's the majority of what they talk about in the meetings. So,
what's the timeline for this? When are they expected to actually vote yay or nay on it?
They actually already have. They did approve it in a working session that happened between city council meetings. So I was not listening in on that stream, but I caught the notes later. They did manage to get the financial review they wanted and vote yay on it. I don't know how unanimous it was, but it was enough to get it through. So I think the timeline is something like 3 years.
Okay. Wow.
Which is not too long for something of that size.
For sure. All right. Well, hopefully it lives up to the brochures and everything. And the last one on your list was this medical marijuana stuff.
Yeah, my notes fell a bit short that month. It was just hard for me to connect and catch the entire stream. But there was a proposal that an ordinance that would have allowed medical marijuana dispensaries to be set up in Madison. And after a lot of back and forth public hearings and arguments amongst the council, it was shot down. I don't remember if that was actually in another working session or if it was at a point where my stream cut off. But unfortunately, I'm not really that surprised about it. We're here in a pretty conservative white Alabama town. They threw up a bunch of old arguments about not wanting to see traffic and loitering, coded language to anybody familiar with historical marijuana laws. But what was surprising is that there were a lot of public commenters that appeared to talk about that, and it was a pretty even split. It wasn't overwhelmingly against. Unfortunately, to me, some of the council members took the opinion of the police chief particularly heavily, and his opinion was that they should wait and see how it plays out in surrounding areas. I'm not really aware which counties and towns have supported such legalization like this.
Huntsville has, right?
Yeah, Huntsville did pass an ordinance to that effect, as did Athens, interestingly enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also interesting that Madison, of all places, voted again, because it's not, it's a medical marijuana dispensary that we're talking about here. We're not talking about recreational stuff. And it's interesting because Mike Ball who's a representative in the state house from Madison, he was one of the people spearheading the legalization of medical marijuana in Alabama.
Oh, absolutely. And as much as I disagree with Mr. Ball on most everything, I have always given him a lot of credit for his work on medical marijuana reform, and I don't know that we would be where we're at today without some of his efforts. So I that's a good point, Jacob. I mean, this is some of his home turf.
Yeah. So so that it's interesting to me, that there's these different representatives from the same area taking totally opposite stances on a very obvious issue. So.
Yeah, I suspect it's something we're going to see again. I'll give it 2 years before this kind of legislation rolls around again, because I do think that the police chief is going to be wrong about that, watching other areas
right. Yeah. Well, obviously.
suffer some sort of consequence.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Tristan, I think this was great. I appreciate it. Was there anything else that you wanted to make sure that we talked about before we let you go?
No, I just say if you have a listener that lives in Madison that wants to go and be another voice on these in these council meetings, they have you got 3 minutes to tell them what you want, and they could use it'd be nice to have more people engaged, to quote the mayor. So, all right, well, I'll see you guys in February.
Yep, see you in February. Appreciate it. Tristan Gilbert, Madison City Council watcher. We're going to be talking to him every month towards the end of the month about this, so we appreciate that. Adam, you had another update about pre-K in Alabama. Talk to us about what's been going on there.
Sure. It is pre-K registration time. Alabama First Class Pre-K registration for the 2023-24 school year opened on January 15th. And may be completed on the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education's website. All children in Alabama who will be 4 years of age by September 1st of 2023 are eligible to register. Students will be selected via random drawing at the local site level. Yes, random drawing, which I'll get to in just a moment. So it's a good time to remind folks that Alabama's First Class Pre-K program is really successful. Over the past 15 years, while Alabama has ranked at or near the bottom on virtually every quality of life metric, the pre-K program has been at or near the top. From the Alabama School Readiness Alliance, quote, researchers from UAB and the Public Affairs Research Council of Alabama have followed the progress of students through 8th grade and found that regardless of zip code, demographics, or school, first-class pre-K graduates are more likely to be proficient in reading and math on state assessments, while less likely to be chronically absent from school, to be held back a grade, to need special education services, and to have a serious disciplinary issue. Pretty good research, I would say. Here's the problem. Only 45% of the state's 4-year-olds are actually enrolled in the program. So we have this successful program, yet less than half of Alabama's families have access to it. Meanwhile, you have legislators like Senator Arthur Orr, for example, discussing a $500 million tax rebate. But for less money than that, we could expand pre-K to be available to 100% of Alabama's 4-year-olds. Imagine how much better our state could be with just this one investment. Thousands of children would directly benefit in multiple ways. Thousands of families would get help with childcare, reducing their bills or freeing them to work more hours or different hours or re-enter the workforce. Think about the job creation with the hiring of additional teachers and assistants in every county of the state, including some of the most impoverished parts of our state that have very little economic development. And there you have the ripple effects across local economies, right? These pre-K teachers, the assistants, now that they are in place in some of these areas, they're going to be spending money in these areas, they're going to be shopping, they're going to be paying bills, paying taxes, etc., etc. Meanwhile, less of our young people will start elementary school behind, and we can actually make a real difference in the achievement gap. Every child and every family in Alabama deserves high-quality, free pre-kindergarten. It's the right thing to do for young people and their families. It's the right thing to do for our public education system. and it's the right thing to do for our communities and our economies.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's such an important thing to note about, because when we mentioned this during the Madison City Council meeting updates, one of the concerns about the community center was opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is just, what is it costing me if there's this upfront, this in-your-face cost. If I buy a cheeseburger, right, for $5, it costs me $5, but it also costs me other things that I could have bought with that $5. I could have gotten a Bojangles chicken sandwich for $5, right, instead of this cheeseburger. And so there are these opportunity costs. And so with a $500 million spending that on a tax rebate, a one-time check,
that for the vast majority of people is going to be a very small amount. I mean, Don't get me wrong. Vast majority of us in Alabama need any kind of money that we can get, frankly, because we are a poor state, and Alabama does its best to keep working class people poor. Right. So if the government wants to hand out checks, there's going to be plenty of us that are not super terrified by that thought. But I think you're right in pointing out the opportunity cost. What benefit will we gain from this one-time tax rebate as opposed to an investment such as this? Universal pre-K. How much more benefit could average people in Alabama realize from that kind of public investment versus just cutting a one-time check?
Yeah, absolutely. In this report, it comes to some pretty, it comes to some pretty rosy conclusions, but there are some things in addition to the issue of not enough of our pre-kindergarten age children having access to this. There are some other issues with the program, right?
Yeah, I mean, the first class program is very successful, and I want to again state that, but it has a diverse delivery option, which means that those classrooms can be not just at public schools but also at Head Start, which is fine, but also at child care centers and churches, which gets into a whole nother can of worms. And the Alabama School Readiness Alliance, the Pre-K Task Force, it's a real who's who of corporate education reformers and business interest in the state. Think former state superintendents like Tommy Bice and, the Business Council of Alabama. So I do understand the rationale behind the model, particularly as the state scales up, but I am definitely wary of it. And frankly, it just makes the most sense to me to prioritize adding these classrooms to our existing public schools, privatization concerns aside.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so with that, we are coming up on the end of the program. We've got a great overtime lined up for you. We're going to be talking to Ryan Cave from, he's the executive, he's a staff for the United Football Players Association, which is the union affiliated with the Steelworkers Union that represents football players in the U.S. Football League. So very cool. Looking forward to talking to him. We're also going to be analyzing Jordan Peterson's advice for getting a raise. We're going to be taking a look at Candace Owens attacking Amazon workers for some reason in her attack on Steven Crowder, which is super bizarre from, ostensibly like a populist, a populist movement of, conservative people. Very strange behavior, but that tracks if you actually understand what the movement is about. So just a few plugs before we wrap up here on the radio. UMWA folks, as I mentioned earlier, still on strike. You can donate at paypal.me/UMWA strike pantry. Just a reminder, friends of the show, Obed Edom have a new album out. Check it out on their Bandcamp. The Labor Notes continues to have ongoing online workshops. The next one is on February 7th. It is What to Do When Your Union Breaks Your Heart. Very good advice there. Leave us a voicemail, give us money, 844-899-TVLR, or our website, tvlr.fm. See you later. Went just a bit over 11, but that's okay. Not a big deal. We're like I said, though, we got a great overtime lined up for you. It's going to be a lot of fun, so make sure you don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral there. You'll either be a union man or a thug party age player. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral there. You'll either be a union man or a thug party age player. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
Co-host is Adam Keller. We are now in overtime. We are off of the radio. This is the second half of the program that is online on podcast, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you get your online content. And first up, we've got Ryan Cave. We've got Ryan Cave. He is an executive for the United Football Players Association. It is the union for football players in the U.S. Football League. Ryan, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. I appreciate it. Ryan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry about
good
that.
morning,
I think.
and thanks for having me this morning.
Yes, thank you so much for hanging out. I know that you're a busy fella, and you mentioned on the phone yesterday that you're actually a former professional football player yourself, and you were part of the union.
Yes, I was in the Arena Football League for 10 plus years up in Canada, a little over a year up there as well. So I've been a part of sports associations, sports unions for my whole entire professional career. So just being a part of this with the USW and the UFPA, what we've done to get the players in the USFL, great collective bargaining agreement is it's amazing for those guys, and looking forward to a great year too with them.
Absolutely, and I'm pretty happy with the CBA that you described to me yesterday. You said that the ratification vote was 100%. Didn't have a single person vote no, which is pretty amazing. But before we get into that, I guess I wanted to start off with some background on the U.S. Football League. When did that league start?
So the USFL was back in the 80s. They were back then, and they rivaled the NFL for a little while in the springtime, and then they kind of had their demise when they kind of went to the fall, when Donald Trump kind of took them kind of to the fall, and they really didn't pan out against the NFL back then. But then they came back. Fox Sports actually bought the league and decided to give it another run in the springtime. A couple former guys of mine who spearheaded this, Kenneth Farrell and Nick Temple, and also Jake Payne. Those guys played in the old AAF and the old XFL that Vince McMahon had owned at the time, and those leagues still exist. And they didn't make it through COVID, and then besides that, the guys really wanted to make sure if another spring league came around that they were in the forefront and making sure the players had what they need. So they kind of brought me over from the Arena Football League Players Union when we ceased operations before COVID. And it was just like a match made in heaven. We planned things out for a little over a year, 2 years. And then when it was time, when the USFL finally came around, and we were boots on the ground and getting things going for guys. And a lot of guys already knew that they didn't want to have the same reoccurrences that happened in those other former leagues. So they knew they wanted the protections, and we were able to get them organized. And everything else is history.
And so some of those other leagues, they were not unionized. Is that what I'm hearing?
No. So spring football in a whole has never been unionized. Besides the Arena Football League. And they've been around for 25 plus years off and on. So
what were some of the issues that some other spring players in spring football leagues faced that they weren't unionized? What were some of those issues that these players wanted to make sure that they kind of nipped this in the bud?
So guys, you run into a lot of problems with workers' compensation. You run into a lot of problems with housing. Some of the leagues ran into problems with funding. So making sure guys had those adequate protections, the rights to second medical, the proper equipment, everything from temporary housing, because the guys won't make what the NFL guys make, obviously,
right.
But for a guy looking to carry on his professional career on the football field, the next 3 to 5 years, the lifespan of football players isn't long anyway. You just want to make sure guys have the protections in place. So those guys are just looking for, like, hey, if I'm going to do this for the next, these leagues paying out 3-4 months over the year, I want to make sure we have the protections in place just in case something happens, because it's a dangerous sport. So you need to have those protections in place.
Absolutely. And so, because these folks, sounds like they were pretty familiar with the history of spring leagues and some of the abuses that players faced. And so they pretty quickly, unionized after this league was started back up again. And what was that vote count? I know that it was pretty lopsided, but do you recall the vote count off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. I want to say it was like 3-1.
Yeah, it seems like I'm remembering something like that. So very, the players were able to win their union very handily, and so I'm sure that played a large role in negotiations when y'all were at the table with management, management knowing that that the union had such high support among the players, among the workers.
Yeah, so the thing when you're organizing these guys, a lot of these guys are young. So a lot of these guys are fresh out of college. So they don't know what a players association is besides what they've heard with the NFL. So a lot of guys it was more so educating the guys. So once you educate them and give them the knowledge, then the rest of it's history. So you rely on the older guys who are part of the league to educate the younger guys, and that's why when we ratified the contract, not one person voted it down. It was 100% because once guys get educated, like, hey, we need this because there is a chance that at the end of the day, when you're dealing with labor and you're dealing with management on the other side, you're going to run into your problems. Football players and sports in general is no different. So, once guys realize that and they realize their worth, because they're the product on the field,
right?
Without the players, none of this, nothing happens, nothing works. So, having them, realize those facts and everything like that, we feel as though we got a great fair deal for the first contract, and the sky's the limit from there.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that first contract.
Before you do that, Jacob, I was just going to say real quick that I think one of the really cool things about your story you're sharing right now is that there are folks listening who this resonates in their workplace, and they're doing something very, very different than playing professional football, right? Whatever job they have, they're running into the same dynamics of the older guys got to educate the younger folks, right? A lot of folks coming into the workplace, without that knowledge of a union and what a union can do for them and what not having a union means for them. So I hope folks listening can take that away, that whatever labor you're doing, whether you're, out working in construction, you're in an office, like the federal employees we spoke of earlier this morning, or you're doing something, a little outside the box, you're actually playing professional sports for a living. As you said, your labor, there's management, there's going to be conflict. You need to have each other's back. And so I'm really, really excited to hear this about the USFL union. I can't wait to watch some USFL games and know that I am cheering on my union brothers on the field. That's really cool to me as a football fan. I just had to say that before we get into the contract.
Yeah, man. It's at the end of the day, once the guys realize, like, hey, the union, we are the union, the players on the field. So at the end of the day, it's what we want, and protections what we can get, and we're only as strong. We're only as strong together. So once guys figured that out, everybody bought into it.
Absolutely, and and you said that the opening games are going to be on April 15th, and the schedule isn't out yet, but there's probably going to be a game in Birmingham on that day on April 15th, and so once we get that schedule and the timeout, I told you that we might talk to some of our sisters and brothers in the Labor Council over in Birmingham and see if we can't get a big group of union folks over there to cheer y'all on your first game. So we'll definitely be keeping in touch with y'all and keeping the conversation flowing. But yeah, let's talk about this contract and what were y'all able to get in this contract.
So some of the main things that guys faced in year one was with it being every team. So USFL has eight ball clubs, and all of them are to kind of make the league more sustainable, which Fox did, was they brought everybody to Birmingham, and they did one centralized hub city for the first year and building it out from there. Year two, we have 4 hub cities, but for this year, for year one, it was It was one hub city. So guys, ran into some issues down there with, over 400 players being in one, city. And Birmingham isn't, a great city. It's not the biggest place. So, guys ran into some housing issues there, facility issues, problems there with, practice times and meetings and what have you not. Just typical things you run into with building out a league in year one. But guys' main things they really wanted to go after was a little bit more compensation, housing, because they had to take care of their own housing for 3 months, and then having to deal with housing in a different city, and then having your own personal situation wherever you're from. That's an added cost, an added burden. Yeah. So guys really wanted to kind of attack the housing, and then more medical protections for guys. So those were the three main bases that the bargaining committee really wanted. So once we were able to get into bargaining and talk with the league, they really went after those three things, and we were able to get I think it was a 17 or 18% increase for active players. The inactive rosters went up to, I think they were about 60% increase. If don't quote me, I don't have the deal right in front of me, but they went from inactive went up about $1,500 bucks. So they brought their total compensation for active players to around $60,000 for 3 months. And then they also have a housing stipend that the league provided for them. So guys will be able to go out and get their housing in their city. So the 4 hub cities this year are Birmingham, Canton, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, and Memphis, Tennessee. So they will be in those 4 cities, and they will be afforded housing there from the league and the stipend. So guys will be able to get their own housing. The medical protections also were a huge gain. Guys have the right to second medical workers' compensation in those particular states, because, as you know, some states don't look at professional football players as workers. So they don't provide, like in Florida, they don't have workers' compensation for professional sports players. So those teams in those teams in those states will have to, the league will have to get the policy somewhere else. Each team has those, great policies in place, and they have right to second medical and whatnot. So just those added protections are really big gains. Guys have travel bonuses. Travel reimbursement stuff to and from camp. They have per diem. There's certain working hour restrictions on a work day, so guys just don't get beat up. Certain practice times, what you can do during practice, what you can't, how long guys can be on the field. Like I said, there's no different between a football contract. It's just knowing what goes into detail into a football. What is a work day, or what does a work schedule look like for a football player? So once we got those things hammered out, like I said, the deal was great. Everybody, the board, the player reps had their input into it, and once they recommended it to the entire bargaining unit, the players knew they had a great deal on the table. It's a 3-year deal with a 1-year opener after each year. So players will be able to go back and get more things and each year. So it's an overall great deal for both sides. And Fox was actually a willing dance partner for us. So once we won the election, they were forthcoming, and they really wanted to get something done and move forward. I will give Fox their due with that. They were forthcoming, and they were they're a great partner to have.
Well, that's good to hear as well. And that gives me just another reason to feel good about this league coming on board for sure.
Yeah, and the I was really impressed by the and maybe it's maybe I shouldn't be so impressed, but by the $60,000 for 3 months of when the league is on is so important, because even though they're only playing games for 3 months, right, they've still got to work for the league the whole year, even if they're not getting compensated for the whole year, because they've got to stay in shape. They've got to, make sure that they're still practicing and all of this stuff. And so even if they're doing some other jobs the rest of the year, they still have to maintain that. And so that is work. That's labor that they're having to do for this. And so to have a reasonable salary, $60,000 in a year, as a base, I think that's a really great starting point as this league gets kicked off, and hoping to see it go even higher.
Yeah.
But and then those worker protections as far as safety and workers' compensation goes, because football is it's a full contact sport. It's like very, very, there's a very high risk there. And so the idea that you wouldn't have something like a workers' compensation would be ludicrous. And so those are very important protections, I think.
Right. And you're dealing with the medical protections. We all saw another union brother, DeMar Hamlin, with the Buffalo Bills go down.
Mm-hmm.
So having that, we have an emergency medical action plan in place, concussion protocols, and all of that good stuff we have in the contract as well. So, you see firsthand what it can do, and it saved the life. So having those same protections afforded to the players, whether they're in the NFL or USFL, XFL, or what have you, it is great to have. So.
Ryan, do you think that there's anything that you wanted to make sure we touched on before we let you go?
Man, like I said, we're just looking forward to a great year 2 in the USFL. Like I said, it was a great win for the players. The league, it's a great football. It's a great football for anyone who's an avid football fan looking to want to watch some great football in the springtime. Like I said, there's 8 ball clubs all around the U.S. in those 4 different hub cities. It's a great talent on the field. Around 40 guys got invited to NFL camps. I believe around 10 guys ended up sticking the whole season. 1 guy was named All-Pro, the kick returner for the Dallas Cowboys, Turpin. He was the MVP of the USFL last season. So, like I said, there's a great product on the field. Tune in. They're going to be on Fox Sports, NBC. So they play primetime games on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And if you're in town, I'll be around in Birmingham. I'll be around in the different hub cities. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, you can always reach out to me on all social media. Plandos Ryan Cave. You can search me. Big Cave 68 on Instagram. Ryan Cave on Twitter. So I'm out there. But like I said, I'm grateful you guys having me on. I'm looking forward to doing this again sometime.
All right, brother. Look forward to meeting you in Birmingham sometime. Thanks for coming on. Ryan Cave, executive for the United Football Players Association, affiliated with the United Steelworkers. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I'm excited for USFL. Seriously, that's some awesome stuff. I know we've talked on the show a little bit about athletes and some of the exploitation they face as workers in a really unique situation, putting their body on the line. And we've talked about organizing in the minor league baseball league, for example, and some of the contract issues that took place with Major League Baseball. So love to see my love of sports and my love of labor unions intersect.
Yes.
So yeah, this keep the sports labor content coming. I'm always down for that.
Absolutely. And while we're talking about entertainment stuff, you had and I've always been a fan of songs, and I think we should sing more as a movement. I'm a big fan of that, but you had some stuff that you wanted to talk about, songs and films related to labor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to look at a couple new segments, or one new segment starting today. So we know that organized labor is making a resurgence in this country, but there's no disputing the long, steady decline in unionized American workers over the past several decades. With fewer and fewer folks directly connected to the labor movement and its legacy, it makes cultural representations of the labor movement all the more important in my view. And with that in mind, we have a new segment on the Valley Labor Report where we will be highlighting a labor song and film each month. So yeah, I think this was a great segue to talk about sports and labor, and then transition over into the entertainment sector. I agree with you. I think there's something very powerful about singing together as a movement. If you've never had the opportunity to be in a big room with a bunch of union brothers and sisters and sing Solidarity Forever, for example, that's one of those experiences that you just can't replicate. And, it's something that I think really does lift our spirits and give us that drive to keep going. So starting off with the labor film of the month, I'm going to go with kind of a traditional pick to start us off. I am going to go with Harlan County, USA, directed by Barbara Koppel and released in 1976. No discussion of important labor films or even important American documentaries in general is complete without mention of this film. I'm going to quote from Criterion. Barbara Koppel's Academy Award-winning Harlan County, USA unflinchingly documents a grueling coal miner strike in a small Kentucky town. With unprecedented access, Koppel and her crew captured the miners' sometimes violent confrontations with strikebreakers, local police, and company thugs. Featuring a haunting soundtrack with legendary country and bluegrass artists Hazel Dickens, Merle Travis, Sarah Gunning, and Florence Reese, the film is a heartbreaking record of the 13-month struggle between a community fighting to survive and a corporation dedicated to the bottom line. I know you're a big fan of this film as well, Jacob. Personally, I couldn't help but make connections to the ongoing UMWA strike in Warrior Met down in Brookwood, which is, as we mentioned earlier, Alabama's longest-running strike. I'd seen it years before, but I did watch it within the past year, and really just kind of hit different, having been exposed to this strike down in Brookwood and covered that strike. So there's a lot of parallels there. And I just got to say, I mean, there's a reason it's on every list like this, because there are so many moments and scenes that will resonate. There's the woman Lois who pulls a pistol out of her bra at a meeting. That was a trip.
Yeah.
There's unfortunately, there's a tragic conclusion, and the fatal shooting towards the end is really hard to forget. One of the scenes that stood out to me a lot was when the miners went to New York City to picket. Again, parallels to the current UMWA struggle. And there was this conversation with an NYPD cop on the street. And I don't know the cop's backstory. I don't think we ever learn anything about the cop's backstory, but he certainly seemed like, a blue-collar background, blue-collar kind of guy. And it was really fascinating for me to watch and listen as he was talking with these Kentucky miners and hearing about their struggle. And you could tell how sympathetic he was. And you could tell, like, he was pulling for them. And so you have that contradiction there between his sympathies for their struggle. Once he had the opportunity to see what they were doing, why they were there in New York to picket, and hear from the miners themselves what was happening, his heart went out to him.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, his colleagues down in Kentucky, the local law enforcement, are on the side of the company, right? And to me, that kind of exemplifies a lot of the contradictions within American culture. So Harlan County, USA has been released by Criterion Collection. Last I checked, it was available to stream on HBO Max. Even if you're someone who normally finds documentaries, a little bit too boring or too dry, I really recommend you give this one a chance. It's as engaging as any work of fiction. And, there's just something about getting to know these folks, these real people and their real struggle.
Yeah,
that's my pick for Film of the Month, Labor Film of the Month, Harlan County, USA.
Yeah, and I don't have much else to say. You said it all. It's a really good film. Highly recommend it. If you're looking for something to watch, definitely check that one out.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to January's Labor Song of the Month, since I went with a pretty standard pick for my movie, I'll mix it up a bit and highlight a pro-labor song I reckon many of you haven't heard. The song is Union Man by the great Neil Young, released on the album Hawks and Doves back in 1980. I should probably admit my bias up front that I am a huge fan of Neil Young. His solo career, his work with all these great bands and musicians like Crosby, Stills and Nash, Buffalo Springfield, Crazy Horse. Rest in peace to the legend David Crosby. And I was actually writing this segment and picked this song before Crosby passed, and after I heard that news, of course I had to make this the song of the month. So despite Neil being one of my all-time favorite musicians, I actually didn't know he had this song. it's kind of a deep cut, so I wasn't very familiar with it until pretty recently. So shout out to Jack, my father-in-law, a retired UAW member, also a huge Neil Young fan, who turned me on to this song.
Now
he
that's
knew
surprising.
I had to hear it. He just knew that.
Well, it's surprising that you hadn't heard it because I had heard it before.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, somehow I missed it. And I've been listening to Neil since I was 15. But somehow I never came across this song until my 30s, I believe. So it's definitely classic Neil Young with a mix of rock and country. It's got a silly side to it. They have like this mock AFM meeting in the middle of the song, with folks making a motion and passing the motion. AFM being the American Federation of Musicians, of course. So Neil is still holding true to his protest of Spotify. You will not find it on there, but you can find it on YouTube, on his official channel, and I'm sure elsewhere. So I really hope you check it out. I would love to play it for you, but then we would inevitably get copyright notices on our video, and YouTube would complicate matters. So I'll leave it for you to check that out. But Neil Young's Union Man, hope you'll listen to it. It is January's Labor Song of the Month.
Awesome. Yeah, so
and if you have any suggestions, by the way, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I meant to mention this. If you have any suggestions on labor songs and labor films that you think would make a good film of the month or song of the month, definitely hit us up. Share them in the chat. Send them to us on social media. Always love to discover new films and songs about the labor movement. And you may also just remind me of some that maybe I've forgotten about.
I wanted to shout out this tweet thread from the Greater Louisville Central Labor Council really quickly before we go on to a longer segment. But that is it is such a cool thread, and I'm gonna maybe and maybe when we clip this segment, Joe can stitch the graphics in here since I didn't get this to him in time. But the thread says, Louisville, Kentucky is a union town. Over 1 year's time, unions have won organizing victories at Trader Joe's with Trader Joe's United. They just won their election last week. At Starbucks with Starbucks Workers United at 4 locations in the city. At Pizza Lupo with Restaurant Workers United Louisville. At Hein Brothers Coffee with Hein Brothers Coffee Union at all nearly 20 locations. At Sunergo's Coffee with Sunergo's Union at all 4 locations. At the Louisville Courier Journal with Courier Journal News Guild. At Half Price Books with Half Price Books Workers United at their 1 location. At Cisco with the Teamsters Local 89. And at the Louisville Public Defenders with the Louisville Public Defenders Union. All in 1 year, in
That's
one
fantastic.
city. That is an amazing round of victories all in 1 year. And so that's just, when I saw that, I had to highlight that. They wrapped up the thread saying, tonight's win at Trader Joe's continues to prove that working folks have momentum, especially here in Louisville, Kentucky. Whether you need better pay, health care, safety, or work-life balance, these wins prove that you can unionize your workplace and have a better life. Absolutely. Very, very cool stuff coming out of Louisville. So I wanted to give them a kudos. That's very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great to see all in one city and particularly a city that, is in the South.
Yeah.
I know Kentucky's kind of right there on the edge, but they're South enough for me as far as I'm concerned. We'll take it.
Yeah.
So way to go,
Absolutely.
Louisville. I don't know what your secret sauce is, but love to
yeah,
see
if you
it.
could share any with us, that would be great. We would love to share notes. And here's another quick hit before we get to analyzing Jordan Peterson's advice for getting a raise. This is a news release from the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor. In federal court, Alabama plastics manufacturer pleads guilty to willful safety regulation violation found in 2017 OSHA investigation into workers' death. So the statement reads this plastics manufacturing company, it's ABC Polymer Industries LLC, they pled guilty to a willful violation of workplace safety requirements as part of an agreement filed in federal court, spurred initially by a U.S. Department of Labor investigation into a 45-year-old worker's death in, is it Helena or Helena, in August of 2017. The U.S. Department of Justice's Environmental Crimes Section and the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Northern District of Alabama prosecuted the case. It was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Alabama. The agreement also requires the company to pay $242,928 in restitution plus funeral expenses to the fallen worker's estate. The company must also pay $176,928 in penalties and serve 2 years of probation with terms including participating in an enhanced compliance and auditing program. In 2018, the company paid $155,338 in penalties assessed by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration after its investigation into the incident. The U.S. Department of Labor Regional Solicitor Tramel Howard in Atlanta says, let the resolution of this case serve as a stark reminder to all employers that the U.S. Department of Labor will exhaust all available resources and actions to hold them accountable when they fail to meet federal requirements to protect the safety and health of their employees. No violation or penalty will recover a lost life and a needless tragedy, but the court's action seeks to find justice for the worker and their family. And the background on this case is that an OSHA investigation found that ABC Polymer Industries employee suffered fatal injuries after she was pulled into the moving rollers of a plastic extrusion machine.
Oh my God.
As a result, the agency issued the company one willful citation for failing to provide machine guarding to protect the employees from caught-in and amputation hazards. OSHA also cited the company for lack of specific safety procedures to shut down or isolate stored energy and its failure to install a rail system on both sides of an open platform. OSHA Regional Administrator Kurt Petermeyer in Atlanta says failing to install and maintain protective guarding on machinery causes far too many serious injuries and deaths. Employers can prevent these types of tragedies, and in this case, ABC Polymer Industries learned that terrible lesson. The company was founded in September of 1994. They produce extruded polypropylene products, including microsynthetic and macrosynthetic concrete fibers. The company is a major distributor of bulk bags, fibrillated yarns, synthetic snow, and more. Under the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, employers are responsible for providing safe and healthful workplaces for their employees. OSHA's role is to ensure these conditions for America's working men and women by setting and enforcing standards, providing training, education, and assistance. So, there's a resolution of this case now, but geez, 6 years after this worker died in a needless accident. There was penalties assessed back in 2018, but that's still, you're looking at a year, 6 months to a year after the incident. And then even though those penalties weren't paid to, the family of the deceased worker, that was penalties to the government. And so it's just, another, just yet another example of where bosses and companies and executives violate the law and kill somebody, it takes years for a resolution to come to a case. And even when a resolution comes, it's just a fine that they're going to look at as, the cost of doing business, where if you or I did something half as bad as that, it would not take nearly that long for us to have serious consequences.
Right. I mean, and I know it's not unusual to see long trials, for example, in criminal cases, but the difference would be, if you or I did something anywhere close to this, we would be hanging out in jail or on bond while we awaited resolution. It's just a stark reminder of the disparities and how enforcement really plays out in this country, and it's just another example of corporations behaving badly.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurts even more when it's right here in Alabama, and it's some of our own neighbors who are the victims of this kind of just corporate malfeasance.
Yep. So let's look at something a bit lighter. Jordan Peterson on Facebook a couple of weeks ago gave some advice to young people who want a raise. And so that's basically the whole thing that's our shtick, right? Is we're trying to help people get a raise. That's like the whole thing is we want we hope to make your job better by educating you about how other people are doing it by coming together, collective bargaining, unions, all this good stuff. And so this is like kind of our shtick. And so we wanted to, I thought it would be interesting to see what his, let's see what his idea is. And you know what? Now that I just thought about this, what I should have done is gotten like a text-to-speech thing in Jordan Peterson's voice. I think that they have those in some AI things, and I should have put all this into his voice so he could play it. But I didn't, so I'm going to have to read it. And I'm not going to attempt to do an impression, so apologies for that. But so here he says, he opens it up with how to negotiate a raise. This is Jordan Peterson. If you want a raise, it will take a lot of courage to step into the office of your boss and say, I want a raise. If they say, we do not have any extra money at the time, and if you accept that and then leave, that is not a good negotiation. And now, up to this point, I'll say that these are all true. I think it does take a lot of courage to individually do this, ask a boss for a raise. Not necessarily the smartest thing to do, but, takes a lot of courage. And then also, if you just accept what the boss says at face value, not a good negotiation. Also, not a good negotiation if you don't have your coworkers backing you up, right? These are all. So here we go. So, I don't know. We're in agreement so far, right?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Well, I agree with you. Obviously, it's always ideal to be negotiating for a raise collectively. Because that's where your strength comes from. But there are times where perhaps, it's appropriate for you as an individual. Either you're the type of workplace you're in, or the type of work you're doing, or whatever the situation may be. Or, maybe you were owed a raise that you didn't get. In which case, that might be a little separate conversation where you would hopefully have your union rep.
Yeah. If you want something, the first thing you have to do is set up options for yourself. Decide whether or not you deserve to have a raise.
Okay, I'm a timeout there. Decide whether or not you deserve a raise. Okay.
Right.
That's interesting. I suppose he wants you to think on whether or not you've earned it. Is that it?
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah.
I would say, given that wages have been essentially flat for 50 years in this country, that pretty much everybody who works for somebody else is due a raise. But hey, maybe there's someone out there who legitimately doesn't deserve it.
Yeah, maybe like the boss. But the bosses don't have to ask for raises; they just give it to themselves, right? And so that's part of the nonsense of our economic system. So decide whether or not you deserve to have a raise. You cannot just ask for one. You have to make a case for it. And now this is, this is what negotiations are. There is a certain amount of making a case for a raise, right? And
sure.
And and part of that in a union context is actually taking a look at the company's books, because in a union collective bargaining environment, if you're in negotiations and the company says we don't have the money
You can say, prove it.
Prove it. Prove it. Right? You can have an information request, and they legally have to say, if that's their rationale, we don't have money, they've got to show you the books. And so here in this case, in a union environment, when you're collectively bargaining, actually, you do need to make a case for why you deserve a raise, but also your boss has to make a case for why you don't deserve a raise, right? Which is not the case if you're bargaining individually.
Correct.
So those are some important things to think about. You cannot just ask for a raise, you have to make a case for one. How do you know if you're in a position to ask for a raise? Part of it is that you have other options. Put your CV or your resume in order, make it tight, and then look around to see what other employment options you have. Options that you would, in fact, take and see what your market value is. Then decide how much of a raise you want and why it would be in your boss's best interest to offer you it.
Well, I would say that I do take issue with saying, see what your market value is, because I think that's sort of that's just kind of bullshit. That's not necessarily a true reflection, right? Your employment options in any given situation at any given date does not necessarily mean that's your market value. And subsequent to that, I don't really care about a market value. I think people have value inherently. But I get his point, and I don't disagree there, that if you're in a situation where you're looking for a raise, you ought to be looking to see what other options are out there for a lot of reasons. For one, you may find something better, but also for the research aspect to it, kind of going, and this is something else that unions will do as well, is research comparable industries, right? When I was on the bargaining team of my staff union, one of the main things we would do in our initial research was to look at, okay, well, what are similar employees and other state affiliates being paid, right? We're all doing roughly the same kind of work. So what's Georgia doing? What's Mississippi, Tennessee, etc.?
Right.
It's the same concept. And so I don't disagree there necessarily on that part of it. How do you know if you're in a position to ask for a raise? Well, I think that, and I do think that goes beyond just what are your options in terms in the market. How are you in a position to ask for a raise speaks to deeper issues inside the workplace. Like, do you have a management structure that is conducive to you even asking for such a thing, right? Do you even have the opportunity to speak to a literal person with such authority? Because that is an increasing trend in workplaces, is that you as a worker don't actually get to interact face-to-face ever with someone who actually has the authority to give you something as significant as a pay raise. And now we're seeing folks who are even being fired via apps and text messages, and automated emails. And
Like this whole thing, the whole advice, and just spoiler, is basic. It's all premised on this individualism kind of thing that he's known for, right?
Right, and that's what I take issue with.
In so many instances, so many people this just doesn't so many employment situations. This just doesn't apply to, like Uber. What are you going to do if you're an Uber driver? What are you going to do if you're an Amazon worker? All these
Bezos and
I mean, it just does not. It doesn't compute in so many. In so many instances. This is just like it's just nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of it is just is decent enough advice from that individual position,
right?
As long as you understand the context that it's not going to apply in a lot of situations and to a lot of people. So it's fine. If you're teaching a personal finance class to some high schoolers or college kids or something, and you want to pass along some of this advice. So far, what he shared isn't terribly controversial. It's just missing some key ingredients.
And I'll tell a story at the end of this of when I did a lot of this. I did a lot of this when I was working in a restaurant, and I got a raise. And so I'll tell that story at the end of this, but some issues with that. You need to have options, and you have to negotiate from a position of strength.
Correct.
Also, Also, you have to know what you want. Then you have to develop strategies for communicating what it is that you're asking for, and you have to be forthright about that. You have to think through the reasons, because otherwise you will not have enough courage to tolerate the conflict that it might entail to withstand the negotiation. Here, very good thing. I mean, this is great, and this, and there's just a bit here of like power analysis. Because here he's not even necessarily talking about market value. This is a power analysis, a very, a kind of confused one maybe. But negotiating from a position of strength, developing strategies, tolerating conflict, negotiations.
Yeah, that's all fair enough.
Yeah, this is all good. And this is all things that...
Nothing groundbreaking.
But this is something that a bargaining committee would do in a collective bargaining environment. If you think you're an agreeable type, one way of fortifying yourself is to understand how much misery and conflict you may be storing up for yourself in the future if you refuse to engage in reasonable negotiation on your own behalf in the present. And this is exactly one of the things that we talk to people, that union organizers tell people when they're considering organizing, because that is a lot of conflict, especially in a place like Starbucks where, where the company is just engaging in a scorched earth anti-union campaign. But the thing to think about is how much conflict, how much, in his words, misery are you storing up for yourself in the future if Starbucks workers don't organize on a national scale and don't gain a big market share and don't get, pool for themselves a lot of power, right? And that's the important thing, is that, all of this stuff is well and good in an individual setting, and it's fine. And this is not bad advice per se, but it really, really misses, I think, a key thing about workplaces and compensation, and it's about power. A lot of times, it's about much more about power than it is about market value, right? Because what does that even mean, market value? And we can show the lie here when we just compare Amazon drivers to UPS drivers. What is the market value of a UPS driver? The market value of a UPS driver is not, they're doing the same thing, more or less, as an Amazon driver. Basically the same thing. I'm sure that the union has set up some more training, and there's some more, I'm sure that there's got to be some more specialization because the union has been there so long and they've grown with the company and all this. But the basic thing... At the end of the day,
they're delivering packages.
At the end of the day, they're delivering packages. And yet their compensation package is more than double what Amazon workers make. I remember talking to an Amazon worker, and who was not a delivery driver, but a factory worker. And so I asked her how much she thought that, or how much, I asked her how much the Amazon delivery drivers made, and she said, I don't know, like $16, $17 an hour. And so I asked her how much the unionized UPS drivers made, and she said, I don't know, maybe $18, $19, maybe $20 an hour. And so I told her, I said, try $35 to $40 an hour after you've topped out, after you've been there on your progression for like 4 years, I think. Whereas an Amazon driver has no, maybe an Amazon driver after 4 years, instead of making 16, is maybe making 20, 21, maybe. I don't know, right? But it's not 40. It's definitely not 40. And that's what Teamster drivers are making, plus healthcare, plus retirement, plus, all this other stuff, right? And so how did they get that? They got it because they pooled they collectively bargained. It was a power thing. It's not a value thing. It's not that these people individually are any more powerful or any more valuable. So they have more power.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is that I don't really think there is such a thing as like this objective market value that like somehow we can find and be like, yep, that's the answer. It's constantly in flux, and it is a synthesis of contradictions of power. and power dynamics and how that plays out in the marketplace. So, right, you have folks who are delivering packages via trucks, doing more or less the same work, drastically different results in terms of compensation and benefits and working conditions. That's a result of those contradictions playing out and the power dynamics at play there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't see that there is that objective, market value, quote unquote, that you could peg to someone. It's all in flux. It's all a fluid dynamic.
Right.
So I think that is another area where it kind of misses the mark. So, and it is very individualized, and while that's how we're kind of expected to behave and expected to think, and I get all that, but the economy is a social mechanism, right? It's all social. We have a society. I mean, I don't know.
We live in a society.
Right.
Yeah.
We live in a society. I don't know how to dress it up much more than that beyond we live in a society. You are not just one atomized individual operating in the marketplace. We are all dependent on everybody else to make this economy go and to make this economy work. And it's just a matter of who has the power in that situation and who doesn't. And that's the rub.
Yeah. Well, and so the thing is, I mentioned the story, and I did a lot of this when I asked for a raise when I worked at the restaurant that I worked at. And so I was a server, or I did all of the jobs. I worked in the back and I served, and I did managing shifts, and which didn't give me any hiring or firing power, but they called me a manager so that I could order the groceries and lock up at night, right? But
right.
And so I asked for a raise. I had been there for 2 years. And so I said, I was like, all right, look, I'm a really valuable employee, blah, blah. Here's all the reasons that I'm a good employee. You should give me $3 an hour instead of $2 an hour when I'm serving.
Gotta know your worth.
Yeah, I gotta know my worth. And so they did, and that was helpful enough, but it was fine. It was a little bit more on, instead of my paychecks being like $12 every 2 weeks, they were like $50 every 2 weeks. And so, I don't know, that's a tank of gas, and that's not anything to sniff at. But like, what happened is that, and I just wasn't thinking communally, because the rest of the servers, none of them got a raise. And also, by the time I had been working there like 3 or 3.5 years or something, I hadn't gotten another raise. And that's one of the things. And also, I was only one person. I could have gotten more, and everybody could have gotten more if we had come together, right? And so that, that's another thing, is that it really leaves out other people who deserve help too. Instead of just thinking about yourself and being selfish, it's worth thinking about like how you if you're a type of person who is outgoing and who's a really valuable employee, then maybe you should think about using that to help other folks that you work with. That's something that would be worth thinking about, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you have that capacity, if you're a natural leader in the workplace, see how you can parlay that into collective gains.
Yeah.
And I did want to mention we got a lot going on in the chat. One of the issues that Jose mentioned was the way part-timers are being treated. We were using UPS, and Amazon's kind of an example there, but that's not to dismiss very real issues happening in UPS.
Right.
And that's exactly right with the part-timers and the way they are treated. And we've seen that in other industries, unfortunately in unionized industries, this trend of bringing in part-timers and temporary help, and of course 2 tiers in some industries now. It's a problem. There's a race to the bottom. Mm-hmm. There is a race to the bottom. So there we go. You talk about market value. Well, the capitalists, the folks who have the capital, the folks who employ us, are racing to the bottom and competing amongst each other to drive down the market value, quote unquote, of labor. So, Teamsters have been able to have more success through UPS, though clearly not enough.
Right.
But, in Amazon, it's even worse, where they're lacking representation and they're lacking that collective voice. We're thankful to the unions who are fighting to bring that. RWDSU, of course, here in Alabama, the Amazon Labor Union up in New York. But it's time for changes in industry after industry, especially the logistics and delivery industries. I mean, the pandemic, I think, really exposed some things there, how dependent we were on these workers, how overworked so many of these workers are, and that's across the board, right? UPS, Amazon, FedEx, DHL, USPS. There are just so many folks who are being overworked in this industry, and it's time for that to change. But you know what? I don't think if you just took the Jordan Peterson approach and walked into your boss's office and said, you know what? I think they're forcing too many deliveries per hour on us.
Right.
We should probably rethink that. Here's me making a case for changing that.
Yeah.
Let me know how that goes.
Yeah. But also probably just don't do that.
Probably wise not to do that unless you want to have a target on your back.
Right.
And that's one of the best ways to get a target on your back is to go off, rogue by yourself. Mm-hmm. Thinking that you are going to, transform all these issues and transform the workplace, and you're going to take on management by yourself. And, as much as I love to see the fighting spirit, I've been there, done that, and I don't advise it.
Yeah.
I don't advise it. There's a reason you come together with your coworkers.
Yeah, there was and I'm going to have Joe stitch this into the clip, but there was a great TikTok that AFGE put out, their national, on their TikTok page, that had this guy with a big fruit flower basket, arrangement thing.
Yeah, like edible.
An edible arrangement. Kind of and so this person in an AFGE shirt is looking at this guy with this edible arrangement thing, and she's like, "Oh, what's that for?" And he said, "I'm asking for a raise today or something." And she was like, "Oh, you're buttering up the boss." And he was like, "Yeah, but we all got to do what we got to do." And she was like, "No, we actually bargain our raises collectively, and my scheduled raise kicks in next week. But good luck." So it's a great TikTok.
Yeah. I would much rather rely on the power of collective bargaining and the threat of withholding our labor than the buttering up with edible arrangements and the such like that.
Yes.
No offense to folks who do that. Hey, if you have a boss that you like and you want to send them flowers or something.
We got to do what we got to do. No judgment.
We all got to survive.
Maybe there's a better way.
If that's what helps you survive and keep your nose clean and stay out of trouble, I get it. But it's no substitute for collective power.
Yeah. So Sid mentions in the chat that they have a great parody ad from the 70s, and we've covered that. We played that on the show.
Definitely check that out if you haven't seen it.
Adam, so we do a labor history segment every month. What happened in January?
Let's do some January labor history. It's the end of the month. All right, let me switch this camera around. Sorry about that. So we've had very few technical glitches today. I'm very proud to say. I appreciate some of Ben's work in the past week to kind of clean some things up for us. Really, the only glitch we've had is that it's just been a little bit slow, so I do apologize for that, some of the transitions today. But aside from that, everything seems to be okay. All right. Let's do this. We're closing out the month of January. I wanted to take a few minutes to share some of the January anniversaries in labor history. As with every month, I compiled this information primarily from the 2022-23 edition of Planning to Change the World, a plan book for social justice educators. This excellent planner is published by the Education for Liberation Network. I want to make sure I give them full credit. Shout out as well to the Zen Education Project, which is another great source. You can check out their This Day in History post on social media, hashtag TDIH. Definitely follow those. Those of you who are regular listeners know that I'm much less online than Jacob, but for those of you who are into that kind of thing, check out hashtag TDIH for some great stuff from Zen Education Project. I tried to focus on labor issues primarily in these anniversaries. So we're going to start out, though, with January 1st. It was the 160th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation becoming law. Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, issued in September 1862, became law on January 1st, 1863. Of course, the proclamation only freed slaves in the Confederate States because Lincoln was wary of antagonizing those southern states that had remained loyal to the Union. Lincoln was morally opposed to slavery, but questioned the constitutionality of abolishing it outright. Eventually, he came around and paved the way for the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery throughout the U.S., except for certain situations, as you're well aware. So while the proclamation was arguably a more symbolic decree than a practical one, it was a transition point where the Union war effort became further entwined, not just with preserving the Union, but abolition of slavery inside that Union. And for that reason, it's worth remembering. January 3rd was the birthday of Lucretia Mott, born in 1793 and living until 1880. Mott was a white activist in the women's rights and abolitionist movements. Offended by the exclusion of women from the anti-slavery movement, she helped organize the Seneca Falls Convention to address women's rights and abolition. She later became the first president of the American Equal Rights Association, an organization aimed at achieving equality for women and African Americans. January 5th was the 120th anniversary of Lone Wolf v. Hitchcock. Kiowa Chief Lone Wolf sued Secretary of the Interior Hitchcock, claiming that Native American tribes had been forced onto reservations under the Medicine Lodge Treaty and that they had been defrauded of their land by the acts of Congress in violation of the treaty. In a disgusting decision, the Supreme Court held that Congress could unilaterally nullify treaties between the U.S. and Native tribes. The consequences were predictably devastating for the tribes. Another reminder of the anti-human legacy of the U.S. Supreme Court and the imperialist oppression of our indigenous brothers and sisters. January 5th was also the 100th anniversary of the Rosewood Massacre. After a white woman wrongfully accused Jesse Hunter, a black man, of assault, local white men launched a manhunt and lynched another black man, Sam Carter, for allegedly assisting Hunter's escape. After several nights of tension and violence between the black and white residents of Rosewood, Florida, on January 5th, a mob of 200 to 300 white men went on a rampage, killing 30 to 40 black men, women, and children, and burning the town to the ground. January 11th is National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. The goal of this day is to raise awareness of and vigilance for the millions of human trafficking victims around the globe, with the aim of eradicating this insidious crime. And we often hear about human trafficking in the context of crime and sex workers and things of that nature. But let's not forget that human trafficking is taking place across the world and is unfortunately prevalent in industries across the world. I know one of the most high-profile examples would be the cocoa and chocolate industry, which my understanding has historically relied upon child labor and human trafficking to complete that labor. January 13th, 1893, saw the birth of the Independent Labour Party in Britain, with James Keir Hardie as its leader as they sought to advance working-class candidates in Parliament and build a labor politics outside the middle-class Liberal Party. January 14th, 1868, the South Carolina Constitutional Convention met with a majority of black delegates, adopting a constitution that provided for all people regardless of race, economic class, or gender. It was a progressive document written in the aftermath of the Civil War, when in 1868 state constitutions across the South were rewritten by both black and white delegates. In the years that followed, Reconstruction was prematurely ended, with Northern industrialists and the federal government abandoning the South to the reactionary, anti-democratic violence of the former planter class. In state after state, brief periods of interracial governance were at times gradually and at other times sharply ended by white supremacist rule. But it's a good reminder that often in American history we tell the story as if it's just a steady slope upwards of progress, right? That we're always just marching forward in progress. And that's not quite true. We move forward, we move backwards, and on and on. It's not necessarily this straight line of progress because we saw true progress, or at least the potential of it, in the aftermath of the Civil War, only for those hopes to be dashed away. January 16th was, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, the federal holiday at least. It's observed on the third Monday of January, around the time of King's birthday on the 15th. Martin Luther King Jr. was not just a prominent leader in the civil rights movement and an Alabama icon for justice. He was a dedicated friend and champion of the American labor movement. Someone who was dedicated to opposing militarism, empire, poverty, and bigotry, right? We often forget about Dr. King's anti-war work, his work on behalf of poor people and on behalf of the labor movement, and it's worth remembering. January 17th was the 130th anniversary of the American overthrow of the Queen of Hawaii. I won't try to pronounce her name and make a fool of myself, but it was the overthrow. Recognizing the strategic and economic value of Hawaii, a group of Americans and U.S.-born Hawaiian citizens staged a coup against the independent kingdom and established a provisional government with Sanford B. Dole as its president. U.S. President Cleveland tried to restore the Queen to power, but stopped short of overthrowing the illegal Dole government. Ultimately, Hawaii was officially annexed to the U.S. in 1898 and became the 50th state in 1959. Indigenous Hawaiians are still fighting for equal rights. That wasn't the only American coup on that day, unfortunately. January 17th, 1961 was the execution of Patrice Lumumba, democratically elected Prime Minister of the Republic of the Congo. The coup, backed by the Americans and the Belgians, is arguably one of the most significant Western interventions in Africa during the Cold War era. It's one of those great what-ifs, at least in my mind, when we look at world history, and particularly in Africa during the Cold War. What if Lumumba had not been murdered and had been allowed to rule in the Congo with his democratic mandate? It's one of the most interesting what-ifs out there for me in more contemporary history. So I want to send solidarity with all peoples exploited and oppressed by the forces of empire. On that note, January 18th was the 80th anniversary of the first Jewish uprising in Warsaw Ghetto. The German military entered the Warsaw Ghetto, planning to deport a portion of the population. The residents believed the Germans were planning to deport everyone in the area. This time, the Germans were met with armed resistance. This urban uprising in German-occupied Europe resulted in a new sense of hope for the Warsaw Jewish population and sparked rebellions elsewhere. 230 years ago, on January 21st, 1793, in the aftermath of the French Revolution, King Louis XVI of France was guillotined on the charge of conspiring with foreign countries for the invasion of France. During the Revolution, the king had attempted to flee to Austria for assistance. 10 months later, his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, was also guillotined. Just a reminder to what happens to elites who get a little too big for their britches. January 22nd is the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. This landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision determined that women had a constitutional right to an abortion. Nearly every state outlawed abortion at the time, except in limited circumstances, leading more than 1 million women each year to seek illegal, unsafe procedures. The justices drew on the 1st, 4th, 9th, and 14th Amendments in making their decision, which has been at the center of an ongoing debate about a woman's right to choose what happens to her body. We mark this 50th anniversary months removed from the Supreme Court gutting abortion rights under Roe and renewed crackdowns on abortion rights by right-wingers across the country. Sad to see us moving backwards on this front. And I hope some of what we saw in November's election in places like Kansas and Kentucky indicate that there will be an electoral backlash to these anti-choice politicians. January 22nd was also the 140th anniversary of the Supreme Court striking down the Force Act. The Force Act, commonly known as the Ku Klux Klan Act or the Civil Rights Act of 1871, sought to extend federal protections to African Americans in states where racial terror and violence ran rampant. The act was applied to indict Sheriff R.G. Harry and 19 accomplices for the unprovoked beating of 4 black men. The court's decision struck down the Force Act, leaving black Americans even more unprotected from pervasive racial terrorism in the South. January 23rd is the 60th anniversary of the arrest of Patricia Stevens Dew. Patricia Stevens Dew was arrested for setting foot in the whites-only section of the Florida Theater in Tallahassee, Florida. She began fighting segregation laws at a young age and participated in many student protests throughout her early life. At one protest in Tallahassee, Stevens Dew was tear-gassed in the eyes by police, causing permanent damage to her sight. Stevens Dew continued her fight for social justice and civil rights throughout her life. January 26th is the 160th anniversary of the authorization to recruit black troops to the Union Army. Prior to January 1863, black troops, both free and enslaved, were not permitted to fight for the Union Army. Shortly after Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation, the governor of Massachusetts was given permission by the U.S. War Department to recruit black troops. However, while black troops began to form new regiments for the Union Army, they were consistently led by white officers. On that note, a little fun fact, it's believed that the first integrated fighting unit of Americans led by a black officer was actually not in the U.S. Army at all. It was in the International Brigades over in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. So shout out to Oliver Law. Many consider him to be the first black officer to lead an integrated American fighting unit. January 27th is the 50th anniversary of the Paris Peace Accords. Signed by South Vietnam, the U.S., North Vietnam, and the Viet Cong, the Paris Peace Accords marked the formal end of the Vietnam War and U.S. military involvement in the region. U.S. troops did begin to withdraw. However, the war continued until 1975. More than 58,000 American troops died in Vietnam. It's estimated that between 1 to 2.5 million Vietnamese died during the conflict, along with hundreds of thousands of Cambodians and Laotians. And of course, the criminals responsible, from Richard Nixon to Henry Kissinger to Lyndon Johnson, never faced any consequences for their crimes. January 28th is the 60th anniversary of Harvey Gantt's enrollment at Clemson University, becoming the first black student after the university was ordered to admit him by the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in 1963. January 28th is also the birthday of José Martí, the Cuban poet, philosopher, and freedom fighter, born this day in 1853. He fought for Cuba's independence from Spain. He also argued against the threat of U.S. expansionism into Cuba. In 1869, Martí founded the newspaper, which he published many of his poems in. He was arrested in Havana and deported to Spain, where he published his pamphlet, Political Imprisonment in Cuba. In 1895, he returned to Cuba to fight for its independence and died on the battlefield. January 29th is the 160th anniversary of the Bear River Massacre. U.S. volunteer soldiers attacked a Shoshone village on the pretext that they had attacked white settlers in the area. In fact, the settlers had stolen all of the land and water from the Native Americans in the area. Initially, the destitute Shoshone were able to hold off the soldiers, but the battle soon devolved into a massacre with mostly unarmed men, women, and children being slaughtered indiscriminately. The Shoshone death toll has been estimated at between 300 to 400, compared to 14 casualties among U.S. troops. And finally, January 29th is the birthday of Thomas Paine. Shout out to friend of the show, Professor Harvey J. Kaye, who is a Tom Paine scholar. Kaye argues that Paine's radical democratic impulses have continued to inspire Americans for the fight for progressive change over the past couple centuries. And I know he would be disappointed if he wasn't included in this month's labor history anniversaries. So a little light this month on the more traditional labor history stories, such as strikes. Some of that we can just chalk up to timing. It was some weird anniversaries. For example, the monumental Bread and Roses strike started 111 years ago this month. Kind of an odd anniversary. There were a lot of important anniversaries, obviously, when it comes to race, when it comes to the violence of white supremacy, state oppression, and imperialism. In particular, it's hard to take the legitimacy of the U.S. Supreme Court seriously when you consider some of these decisions that I discussed today. I mean, it was like every week, here's an anniversary of the Supreme Court taking rights away from people, or condoning violence against people. It's hard to take the U.S. Supreme Court seriously when you think about that history. So, just want to encourage folks to continue looking at labor history and to learn from our history as working people, as working class people. We have our own rich history of struggle, and it's worth remembering. And remembering our struggles for interracial people power here in the South and across the nation and the globe.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll do something that's a bit less serious, not as not as important, but still, but maybe a bit, maybe a little fun.
You want to end on a light note?
Yeah, maybe we can end on a light note, and that's with this. Well, I don't know. It's pretty deranged, actually. But what I'm talking about is this ongoing saga with Steven Crowder. And his being really upset about the contract offer that he got from the Daily Wire. And Candace Owens works for the Daily Wire. She is one of their hosts, been very prolific, very radical, in the bad way. And she, for some reason, attacked workers in her attack on Steven Crowder. So I'll just, we'll play this clip, and I want you, I have to wonder how this appeals to the actual working people in her audience, because there has to be, there are working people in her audience that she's talking about here. And that she's so clearly, these people talk about liberal elites and snobbery, and Adam and I agree with them in this critique. A lot of times we see what they're saying, and we agree, and we say yes. A lot of people, a lot of liberals, quote unquote, can be really weird about working people and about people from the South. Particularly, but especially like poor working people, there's just some weird paternalistic, snobbery that goes on among liberal elites. But I don't understand how the folks who say that in one breath don't hear this from Candace Owens and say the exact same thing about her. Let's listen to what she had to say.
Which is why it is not worth us saying anything more, in my opinion. I don't know what the Daily Wire is going to say about it further. But the reason why this doesn't really matter is I think that people are really seeing just how nasty what you did was. And I think that I would hope that you would come to terms with the fact that you owe everybody an apology, that this was never necessary, that you can start whatever company you want. You don't get to step in like a socialist, and it is socialist-like. These are the demands that you hear, and people are trying to establish a union when the Amazon workers have walked out because they have decided that they are worth more, that they should have 3-hour lunch breaks. They've gotten their contract from Amazon, and they realize that their lunch breaks are only 1 hour, and that they're required to show up to work, and they think they should be able to work from home for 3 days a week post-COVID, and they walk out and they want to stage a union, and this is the big con. It's Amazon. No, this is the free markets. And so to Tim Pool, what I would say, and I like Tim Pool, and I think that he is always very kind to all of his guests that he has on his show. But when he says that he doesn't think $50 million is enough, I would like to say that the free markets will answer that question, right? It doesn't look like anybody's come to him with an offer that's bigger.
Well, you heard it here, folks. If you ask for a raise, that's socialism.
I mean, there's just so much there that's so, just so gross. I mean, for one, the idea that Amazon workers have an hour for lunch is absurd. I mean, and you know,
and they're asking for 3 hours for lunch.
Right. I mean, just look at her set.
What kind of lunch breaks does she take every day?
Yeah.
I wonder.
Look at, she's wearing this fancy ass silk robe, in this, expensive looking studio, talking about how Amazon workers, presumably, because she even said they take an hour lunch with disdain, as if they wouldn't be worth an hour lunch. I think they should get an hour for lunch, and I think they should be paid for it. And the idea that a company could be exploitative is just, she pretends not to understand that, because there's no way that she can actually believe that companies can't be exploitative. But if you admit that, as Crowder has, like Crowder has, then this whole conservative capitalist propaganda really starts. You start pulling on that thread. If you pull on that thread and you say that, actually a contract that a worker agrees to voluntarily can be exploitative, you start pulling on that thread, and really the rest of it starts to come pretty quick after that, right? And so you can't admit that.
Yeah, and I think that's why she sort of frames it as if it's actually workers who are the exploiters or the aggressor in this, right? That they are the ones who are greedy. You give them an hour for lunch, they'll want 3 hours for lunch. And I think you're right on that. And one of the things that, to me, I think I'm starting to take away from some of these clips that we watch of these right-wing nuts is that there's these contradictions within the right-wing ethos and like conservative politics, because they are welded to free market ideology and to celebrating capital and capitalists, but at the same time, capital seeks profits and it is willing to cannibalize anything and everything to squeeze out more profits. That includes going after the status quo at times, right? And so conservatives sometimes see their traditions under attack. They say it's wokeness, they say it's liberals, they say it's, anything and everything, but quite often it's just business, right?
Right.
The reason you see more diversity on advertisements now, the reason why you see interracial couples or homosexual couples on Cheerio commercials and things like that, I don't think it's because these companies are woke, whatever that means. I don't think it's because these companies have some deep hidden agenda to go after white people or whatever it is that some folks think. It's just business. They just look at the demographics and say, how many markets can we attract in one advertisement? Hey, if we have one white person and one black person, that's more than if we just had one of one race, right? I mean, it's just common sense. But there's that contradiction there that capital, by seeking profits constantly, by seeking to always grow, right? You can't stagnate. You're always looking to grow. You're always looking for new opportunities to squeeze a profit. That means traditions can crumble under that weight. That means things will change from time to time, right? And those are things that bother conservatives.
Right.
Seeing those changes, seeing traditions under attack. But that's the rub there is capital doesn't care about your traditions if it's more profitable to do away with them, right? So if it's more profitable to pay lip service to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to have diverse advertisements, to put, catchy slogans on the football field. That's what they're going to do.
Right.
And to conflate that with socialism is just so absurd, because it shows it just shows the deficits in their ideology that clearly you don't understand either socialism or capitalism.
Right.
Because, how can you say that venture capitalists, that Wall Street firms are socialistic? How can you say that neoliberal imperialists are socialistic? It just defies reason. And so, those things they're always baffling. And it's, these mixture of contradictions within this far right political culture, it's very frustrating to even be exposed to. And I imagine it's quite confusing to the people who are ingesting this stuff every day.
I don't see how it isn't, because, and especially as they are trying to, they've been trying this out for a few years, this idea that, the Republicans, the conservatives are actually representative of working class people.
And there's nothing new under the sun. I mean,
Right.
This ain't the first time that Republicans have done that.
But if you don't include Amazon workers in your conception of the working class in the year of our Lord 2023, how, because clearly she does not see Amazon workers as a constituency that she needs to appeal to.
Well, and I think this goes back to something we've talked about before in the show, where there's class as it relates to the economy and production and labor versus management and who owns what, right? Class in a traditional economic understanding of the term. But then there's class as like a cultural identity and a cultural affect. The way you dress, the way you look, the music you listen to, right? And so what I see from Republicans is when they are doing this posturing,
it's like cosplay.
It's cosplay. It's they want you to imagine, and they are imagining a particular type of worker. Maybe it's a blue collar worker, maybe they're not. But, it's more important that they listen to country music and they go to church and they drive a big pickup truck, right? And they watch regular TV, that they're not on all that fancy stuff. They have problems with Hollywood. It's all a cultural identity, not even tied to their relationship to the economy,
right?
Which is all in a roundabout way doing the same thing that Reagan did when he showed up to announce his campaign at the Neshoba County Fair in Philadelphia, Mississippi, to proclaim his love of states' rights. I mean, it wasn't super subtle. In the 40 years since then, they have tried to become more subtle, right? But there is a particular type of worker they're thinking of who looks a certain way, has a certain skin color, has a certain religious background. And so I think when they're talking about appealing to the working class or working Americans, they're not talking about Amazon employees, Walmart employees, McDonald's employees. We know they're not talking about Starbucks baristas, right? They're not talking about teachers, God forbid. They're not talking about public sector employees, right? Because they're just lazy and incompetent and can never be fired for their poor performance. So, okay, you've eliminated all public sector workers. You've eliminated basically all the service industry.
Right.
So who is it that counts as a worker in their eyes?
Right.
And that's something that I think liberals also are guilty of in treating class as this cultural identity or cultural affect, and not something that is actually directly your relationship to production. What do you own? Who do you own? Are you selling your labor or are you buying labor? I mean, that's the sort of questions you have to ask when you're looking at, the class dynamics of our country. They're not looking at that. and it's so confused as to, proclaim that big banks and large capitalists are themselves socialist.
Yeah, obviously.
It's bizarre. It's just bizarre. And that's why sometimes I struggle to even talk through some of this, because I don't know. I feel like, some of this stuff I sort of made sense out of when I was a teenager. And it's like, how do I can't unlearn what socialism and capitalism mean and how they're different. And so for me, a lot of this rhetoric, it just comes off incredibly ignorant.
Yeah.
If you are saying that BlackRock is socialist, that Steven Crowder is socialist, that Nancy Pelosi is socialist, you're full of shit.
Yeah.
You're an idiot. You're confused. You're wrong. You should read more. I'm sorry.
Or work in the go work in I don't know. It's.
And if you're a working class person and you say those things and you believe those things and you hear what I just said, I mean no disrespect to you, because frankly you've been misled.
Right.
Now, if you're, a business owner, or if you're one of these media professionals or whatever, you can, eat shit. But if you are a working person and you do listen to people like Candace Owens and Crowder and the like, and Ben Shapiro, I'm sorry that you have been sucked into this. I'm sorry that you have been exposed to such misinformation and delusion and ignorance. And I want you to know that you can find out more. There's a lot more out there to be discovered. And I certainly was raised to be that kind of way. If one little thing here or there along my path in life had gone a slightly different, I may be one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
I very well could have been. So I just, sorry to go off on that tangent there, but if you are listening to us and you're one of those people who buys into that, if you're one of those people who likes to troll our comment section, right, because you're a fan of these folks, just consider that maybe these people aren't telling you the truth. And I'm not saying you have to go read Karl Marx and Frederick Engels and report back to us on what you've learned. Right? I'm not assigning you a book review, but there's a lot more out there than what's being presented by right-wing media and frankly by liberal media as well. There's a spectrum of opinion, of ideology, of analysis, and you're better off exposing yourself to all of it and learning from all of it. I wouldn't have the ideas I have today if I hadn't engaged with a variety of stuff that I didn't agree with at the time, stuff that I no longer agree with, right? I think that's important just for intellectual development.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that's for sure. So.
And Sid mentioned small business owners, what the Republicans are referring to when they say worker. And
right. Yeah, well.
You're exactly right. Right. It's the mom and pop shop owner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this week. Adam and I are going to be back tomorrow for a double overtime, and I'm going to be interviewing Adam in a more of a podcasty format as opposed to like a big production radio type.
Yeah, we're going to do kind of a working people style episode.
And then we're going to switch it up, and he's going to interview me, and then we're probably going to bring David into the studio at some point to do that with him.
Yeah, it's been a couple years since this project started. I know some of you listening may have just kind of been turned onto the program recently, so we thought it might be relevant for folks to, if we just kind of sat down and interviewed each other about how we got here, why we do what we do, why we think what we think, and if nothing else, you'll have that context. If you tune in, you'll kind of know a little bit about our stories and how we ended up in this place. So I hope folks will find it interesting. I'm a little nervous because I'm, don't prefer to be on that side of the interview. So we'll see. We'll see how deep it gets. But yeah, I appreciate everyone who's tuned in this weekend. I appreciate everyone who's liked and shared and done all that good stuff. Your support is the only way we can keep going. We've alluded to it before. I'll mention again that we do have a lot in the works to grow this program this year and to have a better program with more outreach and better and more content. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for the survey in the next couple days. We'll get that out on all of our social media channels as well as email. And any input you have is definitely appreciated. And just do us a favor and pass it along. Share with folks. Tell folks about the Valley Labor Report. And if you think what we're doing is important, if you believe that Alabama workers and Southern workers deserve to have, a platform, that's what we're trying to do, and we're going to try to do it even better. So thanks for everyone's support. And my last thing is I'll shout out, I see a shout out from Austin in the chat. Thank you, Austin. It's great to see you. Austin was one of the numerous union members who came to the Thirsty Friday event last night for the North Alabama Labor Council. We didn't mention that on the main show, but worth mentioning. Jacob, I appreciate your efforts putting that together.
It was a lot of fun.
I was working a split shift yesterday, so I could just only pop in for a few minutes, but it was good to see some of my machinist brothers there, and I know you said
there's a letter carrier. Austin from NASA. There was a few federal employees from my union. Yeah, there was a good bit of folks there.
Yeah. So yeah, I was there for IATSE, and it was a good event. Good to see union brothers and sisters out and about. We're gonna keep doing more of that. So thanks everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the episode.
See you next week, or see you tomorrow, and then see you again next week.